In 1971, the Perron family found themselves mysteriously drawn to a secluded farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. It felt like fate, but what they found inside was something far darker. A nightmare of strange sounds, shadowy apparitions, and a presence they couldn't escape. Tonight, we'll share the Perrons' harrowing experiences and explore the history of the house to uncover what's real and what's myth. Is the Conjuring House truly cursed, or does the truth tell a different story? Welcome back to Weirder After Dark, the podcast we get into all things New England weird. My name is Sean, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I am Chris.
And I'm Kathy.
And I don't know if you all like horror movies, but we watched The Conjuring House a couple days ago. And Kathy, Chris, I need to know, what did you think? Creepy? Scary?
Lame.
Oh, lame?
Yeah.
Lame?
No,
Really?
Yeah, I didn't like it.
Yeah, wasn't your vibe?
Too many jump scares.
It got you. I saw
They
it
got
get
me
you.
sometimes,
I
yeah.
saw lame. I'm not scared.
lame.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
was okay. So I was terrified.
Yeah.
I sat with my eyes covered with my hands like a little 2-year-old, like, I'm scared.
Yeah, you
but
screamed
peeking.
a few times. Yeah, I remember that.
It's the jump scares.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Dude, when those hands come out from the closet and the clap, like right there when they're doing the hide and seek game, when the mom's looking for the daughter.
Oh, yeah.
That
yeah,
is
that was
like-
creepy.
I think I may have had my eyes closed
Yeah.
because
Oh.
I knew something was going to happen.
I don't know. That was it spooked me. That wasn't my first time seeing it. I remember seeing it, gosh, I think it came out in 2013. So I must have saw it around there when I was like in my early 20s.
So that's why you were so calm.
Yeah, I still was not calm. There was a few moments that I had some jumps, man. I don't mess around with portals and ghosts and possession. You all know that more than anyone. The gang knows that. That's not my thing. That's not my jam. What would you do if I told you that everything inside of that movie that we watched was pretty much false, except for the names of the characters?
That would make me feel so much better.
Would it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I would feel better. But I am a little scared because if that was fake, is the real stuff more terrifying or less terrifying?
I feel like common sense would say it'd
Say
probably
it'd
be
be
less
less
terrifying. But Kathy,
But we wouldn't be here telling the story otherwise.
yeah, I honestly think the story that I'm about to share with everyone here today is more terrifying and more petrifying than the actual events in the movie, which makes me go, why the hell did they even move off this storyline at all? It's so good. I am so excited to share this with you two here today.
Do you have a reason why they didn't tell the actual story?
I have a reason why Andrea Perron, who is actually one of the daughters, the eldest daughter that lived inside the house, and one of the major sources I'm going to use for the story here today, she claims that the real story was too scary and that Hollywood said that they couldn't share the actual story because they thought it would scare the audience too much and people wouldn't watch it. To me, that doesn't stand up for me.
When was it released?
2013.
Oh, okay. So that's like 12 years ago.
I mean, you go to a horror movie to be
Well,
scared.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
But I guess if they wanted to get a wide audience and if people were too petrified to see it, maybe that would stop some of the money they were making. So maybe there is a little something to it.
Maybe.
I'm not sure. What, Chris, I see your face. What do you think?
No, I'm excited to hear the story because after watching the movie, I was like, what about the movie was real? What's not real? And you're telling me very little of it's real, but the actual story is scarier than the movie.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to hear this. I'm
All right.
excited.
Well, let's
Yeah.
get going then. So if you haven't figured it out yet, today we're talking about the Perron family and their experiences in Rhode Island's Conjuring House. And to really tell the story of all the Perron family's experiences in the house, I'm going to be utilizing Andrea Perron's series, House of Darkness, House of Light, as my major source. Andrea Perron is the eldest Perron daughter and lived in the house from when she was 12 years old until she left for college and was present through all the major experiences the family went through. Andrea and the family look at the House of Darkness, House of Light series as an extremely accurate portrait of what it was like living in the house for the 10 years that they did. So are we ready to get fucking weird?
Let's do this.
I'm terrified.
Our story begins in 1970 in Cumberland, Rhode Island. The Perron family, headed by Roger and Carolyn Perron, lived in a charming Cape-style home with a spacious backyard and access to a highly regarded school system. In fact, the school system is what initially drew the Perrons to Cumberland, as they had 5 young daughters. Andrea, who we've already mentioned, who is 11, is the oldest at this time, followed by her sisters Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, the youngest, who is 5. Carolyn, a full-time homemaker, juggled the endless demands of raising 5 children, shuttling them to events, maintaining a tidy home, and somehow still finding time to manage all of their pets. The Perron's animal family included 4 cats and most notably a one-of-a-kind dog they received as a gift in 1969, a sleek African Basenji they named Bathsheba. Bathsheba. Now, you might be wondering, Bathsheba, as you just were, where the hell did they come up with that name, right?
Yeah.
Carolyn, almost on a whim, had suggested it, and the name just stuck. It came from nowhere. And the girls, they all fell in love with it. They thought it was fun, weird, out there, strange, unique. And they thought that is exactly the type of name that their new puppy that was described as sweet, gentle, and loyal needed. They needed a name like that. Now, Bathsheba quickly became a very important part of the family. Andrea, however, saw Bathsheba as more than a pet. She was her best friend, following her everywhere as if the two were inseparable. While Carolyn managed the home and kids, Roger worked as a traveling salesman, and the job kept him on the road more often than not. But his job kept the lights on, paid for the home they lived in, and even allowed for small luxuries like a very small boat that was in need of repair, short local family vacations, and a small savings account. Despite the challenges of raising a big family on a not-so-big income, the parents felt blessed. They had each other, a stable life, and a home filled with laughter, and they felt as though they were living something close to the American dream. But in 1970, a series of events began to unfold. Events that are going to shake up the foundation of everything the parents knew. Decisions were made in haste, as if an unseen force was orchestrating their every move, steering them towards a destiny they don't yet understand. The first event occurred when Andrea asked Carolyn if she could take Bathsheba for a walk. Remember, they're best friends. Carolyn, trusting the eldest daughter, agreed. Andrea didn't even make it far before her sisters, who were playing outside, noticed Andrea and Bathsheba, and they eagerly decided to join them on their stroll. Without warning, a car full of teenagers sped by at an incredible speed, their windows down, music high, even yelling at Bathsheba and the girls as they went by. The sound obviously startled the dog. Before anyone could react, the dog bolted towards the car, yanking the leash out of Andrea's hand. Within seconds, Andrea was yelling Bathsheba's name, begging her to stop, begging her to come back. And Bathsheba, being the obedient dog that she was, she did that. She stops just immediately right where she was. But in that exact second, an elderly couple who didn't even see the dog hit Bathsheba, and all the girls watched this happen.
Oh, it's terrible.
Heartbreaking.
So sad.
Heartbreaking. And Andrea just watched her best friend just get wrecked by a car.
Is this how you open up the story, Sean?
Yeah, we're going for the feels right off the bat. So neighbors from around the community rushed out of their homes to the scene and they called the cops. Within minutes, a cop arrived to assess the situation. The cop knew instantly that the dog didn't really have a chance, and the officers just told the girls to run, get home immediately, go. So the 5 girls, led by Andrea, did exactly as they were instructed. Just as the house came into view, 2 gunshots rang out from behind them, and the sound seared into their minds, and they all knew immediately what that meant. Bathsheba was gone.
Poor Bathsheba.
The loss, as you can imagine, was devastating for the family, but specifically for Andrea, it's said that it was unbearable. Full of guilt, she blamed herself for the accident. Over the coming weeks, sadness consumed her, turning her from a once vibrant personality into the fraction of the little girl she used to be. She stopped playing with her sisters, she avoided her friends, and she really withdrew into herself. A depression kind of sat in. And months started to pass like this. Roger and Carolyn knew the family needed a distraction. They needed to try to do something, try to inject some life back into the families to shake things up a bit. So Carolyn made arrangements with Roger's mother, where Roger's mother would come watch the house and their 4 kittens, and the family would escape on a short vacation. Go to restaurants, get a swim in, and just escape from the sadness, try to hit that restart button. They couldn't afford anything really over the top, so it ended up just being like 2 days away. But it worked. The family was smiling again, they were re-energized, and it said that Andrea even seemed to regain some of that lost spark. The sound of laughter warmed Carolyn and Roger's hearts, and for the first time in months, they saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and they were finally like, okay, we're going to make it. We're going to get through this traumatic event. But sadly, you see where this is going?
Yes.
It was short-lived. The afternoon, the family arrived home from the vacation. The second their tires hit the driveway, it was apparent something was very wrong. The front door of their house was wide open.
No.
Roger first assumed the best. Maybe his mother, who had just been there hours earlier to check in on the house and the kittens, maybe she just left the door open when she left, right? It was probably just a silly mistake. But as the family got out of their car, something much more sinister unfolded. On the picnic table in the front yard, one of the poor kittens, named Scrunch,
Oh, come on.
laid lifeless.
Oh, stop it.
Limp Scrunch had been beaten to death by something or someone.
Oof.
Graphic warning here. If it's not graphic already, graphic warning. Andrea was the first to see Scrunch.
This poor girl.
So sad, right? And it was clear in the exact moment she saw it that Scrunch's skull was crushed in. So imagine being this poor 11-year-old girl just getting over the grieving of this dog and now coming back from a fun vacation
And
where
your
you're finally
cat's
seeing
head
the
is, like,
light.
smashed
In. Oh, well, to add on to poor little Scrunch, the house had also been ransacked. Inside, food was everywhere. The fridge was emptied. Even the freezer in the basement where they stored all their excess meat for the upcoming winter, destroyed, all just emptied and pillaged throughout the entire house. After recognizing the disaster the house was and the poor pummeled body of Scrunch, they searched for the other kittens. Nothing. And I ask y'all, what kind of monster could do this? Ransack a house, not even steal anything, just like throw meats everywhere, murder animals. Like, who could do that kind of stuff?
Like, what is the cat doing? Meowing at you? Like, it's not like it's attacking you.
Yeah. Chris, what's the psychology behind this? Like, what kind of person does this?
Just a true sociopath. I mean, there's no other explanation for that.
Yeah, it's wild. Later that night, Scrunch's mother, Juliet, one of the kittens, would return home showing signs of also being beaten. However, she had been lucky in the sense that she escaped the extreme torture. Within a few days, a local boy would come forward and admit to witnessing and even partaking in the crimes. Apparently, the events were really weighing heavy on his soul.
Good.
And he would claim that the Perron's neighbor, a 12-year-old boy, was the ringleader who organized the events and convinced other boys to join in. The boy even admitted that he had seen the 12-year-old neighbor beat Scrunch's head in with a bat.
Oh.
So heavy, right?
Just sick, yeah.
Yeah, so messed
disturbing.
It's not going to get much lighter through the rest of the story. It will get lighter, just spookier.
Okay.
Spookier. That's the heaviest part, but it's going to get spooky. Roger and Carolyn immediately went to the police and went to the boy's family with the admission. However, the police were not quick to act. Not willing to wait for the police, Andrea decided to take things into her own hands.
Good for her.
Yeah.
After the loss of Bathsheba, and now this, something changed in her. Her heart was just like aching for justice. She wanted that 12-year-old boy to suffer exactly the same way Scrunch did. So Andrea, with the help of friends from the local community, formulated a plan. She stalked the boy's every move for days, just waiting for the right time to attack him. Andrea would end up jumping the boy as he was walking down the street by himself. And it said that she absolutely just fucked this kid up. Like, broke his
Good
nose.
for her.
Yeah.
Nice.
And it was literally written like, who knows what would have happened if neighbors didn't intervene inside that moment. This obviously completely out of character for Andrea. But obviously she was hurt and she wanted that revenge.
Good for her.
Yeah. Charges were ultimately brought against Andrea.
Ugh.
However, they were later dropped when it became extremely clear what the boy had done to the
I was
home.
gonna say, like, did anybody ever press charges against him for what he did?
Yeah, it ended up sounded like it got kind of washed out. The heartache and sadness that their most recent vacation conquered, as you can imagine, returned in twofold. But now, not only were they sad, the family was devastated and not even feeling comfortable in their own home. And how could they, right? Just got ransacked and their animals got beaten. Carolyn knew in that moment that they needed to leave. She wanted out of this life and dreamed of the perfect home in the woods. She wanted to raise her family away from the chaos of the city and wanted her children raised in the country, somewhere safe, somewhere where she felt like she had some sense of control. So Carolyn begged Roger, but Roger knew they couldn't afford to move. It just wasn't in the budget and the timing was wrong. They hadn't nearly any money saved and it just wasn't financially possible. These things couldn't be done on a limb for a family of 7. It took months, maybe even years to plan a move like this, especially on their budget. Although Roger couldn't promise a move anytime soon, he promised to talk about it when he returned home. See, just days after all these tragic events, Roger had to get back on the road. He had to make money for the family and he had to go. So right in the minute of all this stuff, it's like, I got to leave you, Carolyn, and she got to stay strong. And if that wasn't bad enough, the morning Roger was to leave, a car accident occurred. A man named Mr. Curtis had a heart attack while driving and crashed directly into a rock that sat in front of the Perron's yard.
Jesus.
Yeah. Mr. Curtis was immediately dead on impact. With another unpredictable, painstaking event occurring directly in front of the family and the girls, Carolyn begged Roger to stay. The family needed him in that moment. But instead of staying, right in the midst of this emotional turmoil, Roger left.
Gotta be so hard. And you gotta go work. You're barely making ends meet, but your family's hurting. That's a tough I feel for the man.
Over the coming days, Carolyn did all she could to keep her family positive and distracted. In the wake of Mr. Curtis's death, Carolyn, in the sweetness of her heart, even baked a cake to bring to Miss Curtis, a nice gesture in an attempt to confront a woman who just lost her husband. But Miss Curtis blamed Carolyn and her family for what happened.
Why?
Miss Curtis claimed Carolyn was a witch, especially after all these events were unfolding. Bathsheba's death, the break-in, the murder of the animals, and now the death of Mr. Curtis, all basically occurring on the Perron property. The situation just wouldn't cool down. It was escalation after escalation.
It does seem like this family has a streak of bad luck happening.
Yeah, right? It feels like there's something weird happening, right? Well, when Roger returned home, Carolyn again broached the subject about a move, a fresh start, a home in the country. And again, Roger resisted. The financial barriers were just too much for the family. Carolyn, starting to close off a little bit, as you can imagine, like she knows what's right for the family and he's saying no, he's putting his foot down. She truly felt that he was making the wrong decision. Her heart knew it. Their family needed out of this home and Carolyn wasn't going to take no for an answer. So instead of waiting for Roger to be ready and doing it on his proposed timetable, she decided she was going to take the family's future into her own hands. The next time Roger was out of town, Carolyn picked up a newspaper and started searching through all of the home listings. As Carolyn stumbled through the listings, she laid her eyes on something that seemed too good to be true. A 9-bedroom colonial farmhouse with a large barn on 200 acres of land in an extremely rural town of Harrisville, Rhode Island. This was it. It was perfect. This is the dream house. This is everything she wanted. This was her escape, the place that she would happily raise her family, far away from the distractions of the city. But its listing price, $75,000. Sounds like a fucking bargain today.
Yeah,
right? Sign me up. Yeah. However, Carolyn knew $75,000 was far too much money for the family. Just to give you both an idea of what that's like, $75,000 is roughly equivalent to $610,000 today.
Okay.
So
still a deal for all that property.
yeah, I know, right? Still a banging deal. Roger had already made it extremely clear that a new home, a move, wasn't possible. It wasn't in the budget. Even Carolyn knew that trying to convince him was one thing, but trying to convince him on a $75,000 home was like completely out of question. But could it hurt to just go look? Could it hurt to just see the home? And
I'd go look.
Yeah, that's exactly what Carolyn did. She went to go look. So the next day, Carolyn got her closest friend, Kathy, to watch the girls as she went up to the farmhouse in Harrisville. The second Carolyn saw the home, she remembered thinking, this is it. It was an old farmhouse, one of the original plantations in New England, built in 1736, built by some of the very first people who had ever settled down in the state of Rhode Island. The home was filled with character. The current owner, Mr. Kenyon, greeted Carolyn in the driveway the moment she arrived. Mr. Kenyon was a gentleman with a big heart. He was soft-spoken, and Carolyn immediately took to him. She even commented how it felt like she was talking to an old friend. It was like a connection, a spark just occurred. She knew this is where she was supposed to be. It was like the property was calling her. As Mr. Kenyon gave Carolyn a tour, she was intrigued by the fixtures, the latches at every turn, the cubby holes that decorated the walls, little secret storage areas. It was a beautiful piece of history. And in Andrea Perron's words, Carolyn drank it in like the sweetest nectar, savoring every sip as if it would be her last. Carolyn had to have it. She would have it. She didn't know how, but this was going to be her family's new sanctuary.
Does it feel like this series of events is almost moving them into this house? Like there's something else?
It's like a pull, right? It's like a celestial pull bringing them here, right? It's so great. I'm already getting goosebumps thinking about it. That very day, Carolyn emptied every single penny out of Roger's bank account.
Oh my God.
Approximately $500, which is the equivalent to $4,100 today, and put a hold on the home. What a gamble.
Wow.
What a gamble.
It's insane.
Yeah, right? Like, how is Roger going to feel? He made it very clear no, and she's just...
Chris, if you ever did something like that to me, I'd be pissed. I don't care.
You're going to see how this works out for them. All right. How was Roger going to feel? He had just told Carolyn, full stop. No home was happening. They couldn't afford it. Now their bank account is completely empty and his opinion completely disregarded. Carolyn didn't care though. This was the right move for the family. So Carolyn, She prayed that she could convince Roger to just see the home, because in her heart, if he would agree to a tour, he too would fall in love with the property. So, a few days later, Roger comes home, and you can imagine, pissed. Pissed. So angry. His wife had just gone behind his back, disregarded his opinion, drained the family's bank account, and left them with just the money in Roger's pockets.
Oh my God.
Can you blame the man? Like, not exactly the easiest welcome home that you could probably try to navigate, right? As tempers erupted, Carolyn stayed firm in her decision. Roger, as the man of the household, had done exactly this to her many times. So often, he would make decisions without even asking her. Her opinion, most of the time, didn't even seem to matter. And if it did matter, it was substantially less at all times. As far as Carolyn was concerned, she made a wise investment. It was an investment in their family, but not just their family, their future. Carolyn truly believed that that home was worth far more than the asking price of $75,000. So not only was this move in the best interest of the family, it was an investment opportunity the family could not afford to pass up. As pissed as Roger was, he actually respected Carolyn's actions, how she did what she thought was right. She took a risk. So after, I imagine, a lot of debate, Roger agreed to see the home. It actually ended up taking a few months to get everything arranged for the family to take a trip out to the farm. You got to remember that Roger's constantly on the road, so they needed to find time. But by the time they did, the farm hadn't received a single offer yet.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's a little weird, right? Feels a little weird. Months.
A little weird.
But you got to imagine, too, this is the 1970s, and it is a home from the 1736, so it is old.
And it's a lot of property.
Yeah, so, you know,
a lot of
probably out of reach for a decent amount of people, too.
Yeah.
So a couple months later, the family spent a beautiful fall day on the estate. Mr. Kenyon allowed the girls to explore every square foot of the farm, the barn, and the land. And just as Carolyn expected, they were ecstatic. The girls loved it there. They loved every inch of it. Even Roger couldn't deny it. He saw the draw, the beauty, and also the investment. But what sealed the deal for Roger was the Nipmuc River. It was almost childlike how Roger was drawn to the river that flowed through the property. Within minutes of seeing it, he had his shoes off, his socks off, and he was in the river, knee deep, just kind of enjoying and basking in the river on that ripped through the property. A blissful look overtook him. He could see it. He could imagine the beautiful summer days with him and his family would spend in that river. It was, even to him, the perfect escape. It suddenly felt the property was calling to Roger too.
As you read this, I'm imagining like as if this was a movie, right? And it's like, this is the part where everything seems so perfect. And I'm like, oh shit, like it's not. There's a reason why this man has got his socks and shoes off, like
flapping in
around
the river.
Like, this is not going to end well.
It doesn't. Okay. In that moment, Carolyn knew she had Roger. She knew he wanted it just as much as he did. And the couple was in luck. The farm had been in Mr. Kenyon's family for a long time, and he didn't even want to sell it. He didn't want to give it up. It was all he's ever known. But he had no choice as he was an elderly man on a 200-acre property with no help. And seeing the family on the farm that day, the joy radiating through them, Mr. Kenyon began falling in love with the parents just as much as they were falling in love with the home. He knew they would cherish every acre of that land just like he did. So, while taking a walk, Mr. Kenyon told Roger and Carolyn that he wanted them to have the home and he would do anything to make sure it was the Perron family who lived in that home. Now, I want to be clear. The farm had issues. It needed new plumbing. It needed new electrical. It only had one bathroom for 7 people. It wasn't insulated and it had inadequate heating. None of this was hidden from the parents, but the allure of living on the perfect land, the solitude, the river, the escape was romanticized so much, none of the other things even seemed to matter. It's like the stars were aligning, everything was falling exactly into place. The family wasn't sure how they were going to afford it, but they knew what they had to do, and they were going to do whatever it took to get in there. So they created a tight budget, they eliminated all their excess spending, they sold everything. There was even one really kind of funny story of one of the girls convinced their neighbor to buy some of the family's trash for $25. And then when Carolyn found out, she embarrassed, ran over and gave the $25 back and apologized profusely. But I share that to say, like, even the girls were in. They understood what was on the line and they wanted it just as bad as Carolyn and just as bad as Roger did. Somehow, after pulling every string they could, saving every penny they could, and with the help of a price reduction from Mr. Kenyon, by the second week of January 1971, they were moving in and their dream home was finally theirs.
Fantastic story. We're going to end there, right?
Yeah,
I like the story.
yeah. This is a happy ending. We like this. The day the Perron family moved in, there was a terrific snowstorm. But the move needed to get done and done quickly. When Roger wasn't working, the family wasn't making money, and the family had broken the bank to make this dream a reality. To make things just a hair more difficult, Mr. Kenyon wasn't even completely moved out. The Perron family was unpacking their stuff while simultaneously helping Mr. Kenyon pack his and get him out of the house. Before Mr. Kenyon was to leave that day and officially leave the home in the hands of the Perrons, Mr. Kenyon and Roger went for a quick walk. They exchanged kind words, but Mr. Kenyon shared something that caught Roger off guard. Something he didn't know exactly how to interpret. Mr. Kenyon told Roger, "For the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night."
Ooh.
What?
Yeah. Weird, right?
A little too late to back out.
It would be a long time before Roger would fully understand the context of that warning. At the time, he just assumed Mr. Kenyon was referring to how big and winding the house was and that they needed to be extra careful at night because it was easy to run into things and hurt yourself, especially with 5 small children.
Okay.
Whatever it meant, Roger wouldn't share this warning with Carolyn. Instead, he'd keep it to himself. And this is the start of a Perron tradition, a tradition of seeing or hearing something, experiencing something in the home, and choosing to keep it to themselves instead of talk about it. The reality was, it didn't take long for activity in the house to start. At first, Carolyn, Roger, and the family dismissed the strange happenings with seemingly logical explanations. The first oddity occurred on the very first day. Carolyn, while unpacking, went to go grab the broom that she had just used and left in another room. But when she got there, it was gone. She eventually found it on the other side of the house. Strange? Sure. But with 7 people in the house that day, 9 if you include Mr. Kenyon and his son, it was easy to chalk up to someone in the house having just moved it and forgot about it. But Carolyn wasn't wrong. Someone had moved the broom, but it just wasn't anyone she could see. This was just the beginning. Things disappearing and reappearing became a daily occurrence. While it started as playful mischief, the constant disruptions began to fray the family's nerves. How many times can something go missing before you think you're losing your mind? Or worse, you start blaming others that you love. Over time, you can imagine as this continued to unfold, tensions would rise inside the household, fueled just by these small, maddening acts. Someone in the home messing with them, or were they all messing with each other? Whatever it was, it just wouldn't stop. But harder to ignore than this was the cold. From the very first night, the house felt frigid. Carolyn, more than anyone else, felt its full weight. She described the chill as so physically intense that it hurt, as if the house was sapping the warmth directly from her. This wasn't just winter in an old house with poor insulation and inefficient heating. The cold felt alive, creeping into rooms unexpectedly and then leaving just as quickly as it came. One moment, a room would feel tolerable. The next, frost seemed to settle in the air, cutting straight into them.
That's just creepy.
Yeah, that's weird, right? Even when they used heating oil nonstop, the house would never stay warm. It didn't matter what they did, but it was the freeze coming and going that was the most perplexing part. Carolyn was convinced the cold was targeting her. While others would feel relatively comfortable, she would sit shivering, able to see her own breath, when no one else could see theirs. It felt personal, deliberate, and unrelenting as it clung on to her no matter what she did. And the fireplaces inside of the home, completely useless. Mr. Kenyon, the previous owner, had sealed them all up, leaving cords of perfectly good firewood stacked in the barn untouched. The idea of burning the wood, the warmth of the fireplace, to someone who was just feeling this bone-chilling cold became a temptation to her. Like, why? Why in the hell would anyone go ahead and cover these fireplaces? The frustration began to boil over. How could Mr. Kenyon choose to live in a house this cold? But it wasn't just the cold and the missing items that started to torment them. There were also smells, putrid, nauseating odors that would suddenly fill a room without warning. The stench was so intense it left the family gagging, convinced a dead animal was trapped somewhere in the walls. The family would search the house thoroughly but find nothing. But stranger, just like the cold, the smells would vanish just as abruptly as they would come. As weird as these events were, Carolyn and Roger, although frustrated, assumed there had to be natural explanations for all these. An old house, an old heating system, the chaos of a family of 7 moving, all of it kind of made sense. But as the days went on, the unexplainable continued to pile up. One morning, Carolyn woke covered in bruises. Dark, painful marks stretched up and down her legs and the side of her torso, too large and severe to be from minor bumps. At first, she tried to just shrug it off, think, it's been a big move. I've been unpacking. Maybe I was bumping into stuff. I was carrying a bunch of things. And maybe she had accidentally hit something that she'd forgotten about. But the bruises just kept appearing. Roger begged her to see a doctor. And when she finally did, the explanation was vague at best. Just be more careful. Like the doctor just didn't think anything serious was happening after running tests. Once the bruises started showing up, they were accompanied by a wave of exhaustion. Carolyn would wake up every day drained, as if the very act of sleeping was a battle that she was losing. Between the cold, the bruises, the exhaustion, and the frustration of things constantly going missing, Carolyn felt like she was being beat down. But with Roger often away on business trips, she had no choice but to push through. She had to. She was the sole caretaker of 5 daughters, and she had to take care of the house. She could not afford to crumble, even if she felt herself slowly breaking inside. The family started to notice that certain rooms and areas of the house gave off a deeply uncomfortable feeling, like the air itself had some type of unseen weight. You know the sensation, stepping into a room and instantly feeling like someone is staring right through you, their gaze drilling into your soul. That undescribable heaviness, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up to its end, or the insistent pressure in your chest, in your internal voice whispering that you're not welcome here, that something is present.
Yeah, I have absolutely had that feeling.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah,
my mother, Patty, her husband had a house in Melrose, and I remember the first time ever going there, and it was like 3 floors old kind of home in Melrose, Mass. And I got up to a second floor, and then there was a flight of stairs that went up, and at the top of the stairs there was a door. And I went to go walk up the stairs, and I just remember like being hit, and I just stopped and was just like, I'm not going up there. And she was like, are you okay? And I was just like, bad shit happened up there, right? Like, it
Really?
was just,
You
yeah,
had that
I
feeling?
had that, and I said that to her. I was like, I don't want to go up there, because there was like a room up there and
Yeah.
stuff. I think it like maybe it was like an attic, or there was an attic, or I've never went up there.
Ooh.
And it was super, super creepy. And then I think the story goes that her husband, his parents, they used to like, as a form of punishment, would like put the kids like up in that room. And so I'm sure there was some like bad juju up there. But yeah, it was definitely like that creepy feeling.
Yeah, I remember that
Right up there.
house. I did not like going in there. There was
No.
something off about the energy in the house.
Yeah.
That's weird.
There was
Yeah.
a room too that they used their bedroom, and then there was like I think like 2 or 3 other bedrooms on the second floor.
Mhm.
And she was like, "Oh, like just pick a room to sleep in." And I went to walk in one, and I was like, "Oh, I don't want to sleep in here." And she was like, "Why?" And I was like, "This is like super creepy in here." And she was like, "Yeah, this is the room where his mom died." And I was like,
What?
"Oh, I was like, I was
Oh,
like,
it's
nah."
so crazy how
Yeah.
we can pick up on energies like that.
Yeah.
And Kathy, you gave me goosebumps here from A, that story, but B, I want you to remember and lock into those words that you just used to describe, because I'm going to say something in a couple minutes here that I think might make you go like, holy fuck.
Holy fuck.
yeah.
Okay.
Like, that,
Sean, can I just add something?
Yeah, please.
When you were describing all the symptoms she's having, sounds like it could be an iron deficiency, right? No
Okay.
energy, the bruising, the always cold.
iron tests weren't even like readily developed and available until the 1970s. So it's very possible that it's 1971 when they move into the home that iron tests might not even be publicly available at that point in time, or at least the really good accurate ones. at
Yeah.
least.
And then even if the testing is out there, because it's so new, it's not something that the doctors are regularly thinking
Yeah, I would
like
think
this
so.
is a possible
Yeah.
cause.
Yeah. So that's an extremely good call out.
That does not explain shit moving.
Yeah.
At all.
No.
That is not an iron deficiency.
Noted. Well, that energy we're talking about, several parts of the house carried that oppressive energy, but there was one spot in particular that stood out, a narrow hallway that connected the kitchen to the dining room. Despite being one of the most frequently used areas of the home, the family avoided lingering there. Instead, they moved through it as quickly as possible. The house's strange energy, though, didn't just affect humans. It impacted animals too. The parents' new puppy, who girls lovingly named Jessica Rebecca, 2 first names.
Okay.
That was so cute. I don't know. I liked it. Jessica Rebecca flat out refused to enter that very hallway that connected the kitchen and the dining room. Whenever she approached it, she would freeze, bark, or run the other way. Even when Roger tried to carry her through, the puppy would panic and would nip at the owners, clearly in horror. No amount of coaxing, not even a fresh steak, could lure her across the threshold. In fact, it was said that Jessica Rebecca, if she needed to get into the kitchen, would run out another door, go all the way around the house and come in through the kitchen door to get to it. It wasn't just Jessica Rebecca, though. The family cat, Juliet, underwent a drastic personality shift once she arrived at the house. Once an affectionate and playful kitten, she became withdrawn, darting from room to room as if avoiding something unseen. She no longer curled up with the girls at night, instead preferring dark corners and hidden spaces. These were more than quirks, more signs, but for now, the parents clung to their rationalizations. It was a new house, a new routine, a new life. Surely all this could be explained.
Of course, right?
Yet deep down, Carolyn felt it, the unsettling presence of something they couldn't see, something that was just beginning to make itself known. As evidence began to mount, Roger would continue to look the other direction, but Carolyn's eyes were just beginning to open.
You see, that's interesting to me, right? Because people can freak themselves out. They can scare themselves. But animals, if they're afraid of something, that's also, there's something else there, right? It almost feels different that way.
We mentioned that in one of the other episodes, UFO one, where the guys were in the fields and then
the horses.
Right
the
before
horses,
like the sighting, all the horses and animals and everything started like kind of acting up. If animals start acting weird, pay attention, people.
Yeah.
They know things.
They can sense it. They got a sixth sense. The next escalation in activity occurred on a quiet afternoon. Roger was away on a business trip, and the older girls were all at school. Only Carolyn and April, the youngest, were in the home. Carolyn was in the kitchen when the comforting sounds of April playing drifted down from upstairs. Soft thuds, giggles, the rustling of toys. Carolyn, it is said inside of the book, even smiled to herself, just grateful that April seemed to be adapting so well to their new home. A small win with what has otherwise been a really challenging transition. Lost in her own thoughts, Carolyn turned and saw April. Carolyn froze. April was standing right beside her and looking cheerful as ever. The hair on Carolyn's neck stood at attention. If April was here, who was upstairs? The noise, the giggling, the childlike clatter, it all stopped the moment that she saw April. Carolyn's heart began to race. Her mind scrambled for an explanation. There was no way April had moved that quickly from upstairs to downstairs. Someone else was inside the home. Summoning all her courage, Carolyn darted up the stairs, her body radiating with anxiety as she opened every single door. Her eyes scanned the corners of the rooms. With every door open, she was ready for battle. She checked the bedrooms, the closets, the boring room, everywhere upstairs, but all the rooms were empty. No one was there. Returning to the kitchen, Carolyn trying to calm herself, April, still childishly unaware of her mother's panic, asked, "What's wrong?" Carolyn hesitated, not wanting to scare April, and said, I thought I heard something upstairs. April then provided a really strange response. "I hear stuff up there all the time."
Oh my God.
I'm sleeping with the lights on tonight.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Carolyn paused, anxious.
What do you mean?
Well, yeah. What did she mean? Carolyn looked at April's face, but she seemed entirely unbothered by what she had just said. Carolyn considered asking more questions, digging deeper, but how could she learn more without scaring April, right? Like, how do you ask these questions without like creating a sense of fear? So Carolyn decided to just nod along and kind of let it go and just brush off the event. She thought to herself, trying to hold on to some rational piece of her sanity probably at this point in time. Maybe April could have gotten down the stairs that fast. Maybe she was just lost in her thoughts longer than she realized what was happening. Maybe the sound had been like the echo of her own imagination, and she just decided at the end of the day that it was best to just brush this event off.
At this point, I can still see that, right? I can still see, we broke the bank to buy this house. I'm freaking myself out. I got to pull my shit back together.
Yep. Kathy, you look like you can see that a little less.
Burn it down. Burn it.
No, not burn it down, but like how many weird things can you have happen that you can't explain before you have to start actually questioning it? And sure, you want to rationalize it, but you can't. How do you just like really rationalize it if you're just like ignoring it?
Just
you're
fucking
like,
wait,
no, it's
Kathy.
fine.
Over the next few days, something extremely disgusting occurred.
Oh.
The house seemed to be taken over by an infestation of flies. It started innocently enough, a few buzzing annoyances here and there, but soon it escalated into a nightmare. They were everywhere, hundreds of them. The flies didn't just exist in the house, they seemed to dominate it, almost as if they were mocking the parents. They would buzz aggressively close to the family's face only to dart away at the last second. These also weren't ordinary house flies. They were oversized and disturbingly bold. To add to the confusion, it was winter in Rhode Island, and an infestation in the middle of winter doesn't even really seem to add up.
No, that makes no sense.
Yeah. At first, Roger and the family launched into a full-scale war. Fly swatters, bug zappers, rolled up newspapers, anything they could use became a weapon, but it didn't matter. For every fly that they killed, dozens seemed to replace it. It was as if they were just taunting the family. By early afternoon, the window cells along the family home would be like tiny graveyards as they were littered with fly carcasses. It was almost as if the sunlight itself could pierce the flies and would kill them, and they would fall dead onto the window cells. And the cycle was relentless. Every day, the mornings would be filled with flies. Seemingly, by mid-afternoon, the sunlight would decimate the flocks, and as the afternoon faded, there'd be a few hours of silence, and then the swarm would return, tormenting the family again. Desperate, Roger hired an exterminator. Despite Carolyn's concerns about exposing the children to chemicals, she didn't want the house filled with toxins, but by then, she also was at her wit's end. Something had to be done. So she relented reluctantly and insisted it would be a one-time solution only, and they were never going to have an exterminator back. Like, let's just do it, get rid of this, and be done with it. When the exterminator arrived, his diagnosis left them completely dumbfounded. The exterminator claimed there was no infestation in the home. There were no bugs to be found anywhere in the walls, the ceilings. They were all clear. Floored, Carolyn and Roger, 21, questioned them, demanding an explanation. Carolyn dragged them to the window cell and showed them the graveyard of flies that were there. But even seeing that, the exterminator was equally baffled and doubled down that, I don't know how those got there, but you do not have an infestation inside this home. Roger wasn't having it. He didn't give a shit what they said. He was just like, you are spraying this goddamn house and we are purging these fucking bugs. So he demanded that they stale spray, and they did. Afterwards, for a brief moment, Carolyn felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the nightmare was finally over. But the next day, it wasn't. The flies were back, as relentless as ever. Bug zappers, fly strips, poison, even multiple calls to different exterminators over the next couple months. Nothing worked. The flies remained. The family began to feel like they were losing their minds. The house already freezing. A chaotic prison where Carolyn no longer was able to sleep. Bruises mysteriously appearing on her body. Strange noises echoing through the halls. Weird feelings that were reverberating through the house. And now these winged little fuckers just tormenting the family. You can imagine their sanity starting to unravel, of what was supposed to be this beautiful dream home turning into now fucking just chaos. Like,
what could cause that kind of an infestation in the middle of winter? I can't wrap my mind around that.
I've heard paranormal situations where they say that flies that appear in houses with no infestation is supposedly a negative sign of evil spirits.
We might be coming back to that. Chris, you asked what could cause that. That doesn't make sense during the winter. I thought the exact same thing as I was typing and writing and researching the story. Apparently, when winter does come in, flies will find warmer areas to go and flock to, and they do frequently come in homes and can cause infestations.
But I thought this house was really ridiculously cold.
Yeah, true, yeah.
So it's not like it's like a warm house.
Warmer than outside, maybe.
Yeah, and there were in the book warm areas of the house,
so
like where furnaces were and where the fire would kind of go up through. So, but
rays of light don't kill flies.
Yeah, that does not happen.
Makes no sense that they would die in the sunlight.
For Carolyn, even more infuriating was Roger's ability to escape the madness. He would only be home for a few days at a time, just long enough to witness the house's problems before heading off on his next business trip. But that didn't stop him from complaining. Every time he returned, it was the same endless griping about the flies, the missing items. It was as if he had to endure it all week, as if the family hadn't been living through it every single day in his absence. His words created resentment in Carolyn. The stake of resentment was thrusted deeper when Carolyn would try to talk to Roger about the strange noises, the unsettling feelings, the inexplicable events. His response was always the same. You're imagining things. You're misremembering, he'd say. To Roger, these irrational ideas were nothing more than products of an overworked mind. He couldn't, or maybe wouldn't, entertain the possibility that something unexplainable was happening inside of their home. All Roger saw was a wife going mad. Alone, Isolated and burdened with the weight of keeping their family together, Carolyn felt her sanity starting to slip. Every moment in the house was a battle, and she was losing. And just as things felt like they were boiling over, that's when the real craziness started.
It hasn't gotten crazy yet.
Oh, we're about to get fucking weird.
Oh, you're gonna get weirder?
You're gonna get weird, dude. One day, while the kids were off at school, and with April fast asleep, Carolyn slipped out of the house and into the barn to take a moment to appreciate the barn's beauty. An old shipbuilder had built the barn back in the day, and the wooden beams he carved to hold the barn up were a work of art, strong and beautiful. In fact, a hurricane ripped through Rhode Island in 1938 and claimed most of the old buildings in the state. But that barn stood. As Carolyn admired the shipbuilder's handiwork, she dreamt of one day filling its stalls with horses. It was in the midst of this daydream, Carolyn noticed how ice cold the barn was. The winter air was already bitter, but inside the barn, it was somehow colder. Even in her cotton turtleneck, woolen sweater, and heavy leather flight jacket, a shiver crawled up her spine. Silence pressed against her ears. There was no wind, no creaks. The silence was almost oppressive. As minutes passed, all Carolyn could hear was her soft footsteps echoing against the handcrafted wood, every step seemingly louder than the last. After taking in the building's beauty, Carolyn decided she was ready to return to the house. But as she turned to leave, a loud noise from above her stopped her in her tracks. Carolyn glanced upward, nervously expecting to see an owl or a bird, but it was something much more alarming. It wasn't a creature at all. It was a hand scythe. The blade was hovering in the air, spinning slowly at first. Then it seemed to grab speed. Carolyn could hear it ripping through the air, creating a rhythmic whoosh, 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 whoosh. The scythe, somehow defying all laws of physics. Captivated, Carolyn couldn't move. She was frozen. Then the scythe, without warning, as if it was being thrown by a set of invisible hands, flew directly at her. Carolyn could only watch as the scythe seemed to gain speed before it struck her, its blade slashing her in the neck and the shoulder. The tool then landed edge first into the wooden floors, leaving them splintered. Shocked, with her heart beating inside and outside of her chest, her breath was heavy. She moved her hand towards her injuries, expecting to find a deep gash and blood-drenched clothes, but instead, her fingers met the rough, frayed, torn surface that was the leather jacket. To Carolyn's surprise, the jacket took all of the damage. Although completely ruined, it provided just enough material to resist the blades. Carolyn stood physically unharmed, but mentally fucked.
I mentally fucked after just hearing that.
Yeah. Carolyn couldn't process exactly how it happened. Why it happened. Why was she frozen, unable to move? How was the scythe able to just float in the air? How did it have enough force to launch in her direction? And the aim? God damn, how did it have the aim for her throat? Physically, disaster was averted, but mentally, I think we can all imagine how shaken she was. And with Roger on a work trip and the girls at school, she found herself lost in her thoughts and alone.
Yeah, what do you do at that point? I can't call the police. They're just going to put you in a straitjacket.
Yeah, no one's going to believe
you. Who do
you.
you even talk to? It's
literally was sitting here with my hands over my eyes. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I was terrified.
You're hiding from what Sean's talking about.
But how do you explain that to someone?
Yeah.
With, like you said, without making yourself literally sound crazy.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I really
you're
feel
alone.
for her. She's on an island at this point. Like, what do you do?
Yeah. And then, I mean, you have small children. So
you have to stay strong.
You have to stay strong. And
Roger's being kind of a dick about it.
Yeah. But I mean, if you say something to someone, it's not just you that's going to be affected. Like, they could literally take your children away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
that's a great point.
I mean, what do? Like, you just have to suck it up and move ahead.
To that point, Carolyn wouldn't tell Roger, or anyone for that matter, about this event for months. And how could she? Roger wouldn't even believe her that there were noises in the house, things moving in the house. How could he ever believe this? He wouldn't. So instead of sharing, Carolyn decided to suffer alone. As the months went by, the flies grew more relentless. The biting cold seeped deeper into the house, and the strange, unexplainable events continued to escalate.
Another thing that they talk about being a sign of negative energy is cold. Usually that's a sign of
they like suck the energy out, creates the cold so they can manifest.
And then like the same thing for like smells. When you have like a foul smell, it's usually associated with a negative energy.
This girl knows ghosts.
Yeah. As weird as this sounds, it sounds like the house itself is trying to separate Roger from his wife.
Oh, that's an interesting theory.
Like she's getting all this and she's like, I get nothing.
Yeah, because I was going to say, right? Does stuff happen when he's there?
Let's let the story unfold a little bit.
All right.
Okay.
You all are on to something interesting.
Okay.
Adding to Roger and Carolyn's mounting stress, the electricity bills randomly began to surge. Every month, the electric bills seemed to climb higher and higher. How, though? The girls were at school most of the day, and it was only April and Carolyn in the house. It made no sense. Roger would come home furious. In his mind, he was giving everything he had on the road, and his nonstop hours to earn money couldn't keep pace with these electricity bills. How could Carolyn be so careless? Was she cranking the heat all day? Was she leaving every single light on in the house and every single room? This was ridiculous. It was absurd. The numbers didn't even seem to add up. They were already struggling to make ends meet. And now this? You can imagine these mounting pressures are just causing tempers between these two just to continue to flare over and over. And to Carolyn, it also made no sense. She spent her days in this home freezing her ass off, bundled in layers of clothes with like very few lights on. She would push back on Roger's rage, insisting that instead of blaming her, he call the fucking electric company to come look at the meter and find some of these phantom lights that she had on inside of the house. She knew how much the family needed the money, and she knew there was no money to waste, and she froze as a result of these decisions. And it was just seeming to continue to stack up that the parents' dream home, what they poured everything into, all of their hopes, was turning against them, and they just had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Desperate for relief, anything to end the tension, Carolyn thought of one solution to their problems: the fireplace. Though Mr. Kenyon, the previous owner, had sealed them up, Carolyn reasoned that what once was sealed could easily be unsealed. The thought of a warm, glowing fire, we said earlier, consumed her. It was the only answer. 2 birds, 1 stone. An operational fireplace would chase away that cold and hopefully shrink their electric bill. So one day, while Roger was away and with a crowbar in hand, Carolyn's rage was directed at the fireplace.
This isn't going to end well with the fireplace, is it?
Swing after swing after swing. The layers of horsehair plaster, brick, wood gave way. By the time the fireplace was revealed and the debris were removed from the room, it was late. Exhausted but satisfied from her efforts, Carolyn rewarded herself with a warm shower. As Carolyn was showering, their neighbor, Miss Pettigrew, stopped by unexpectedly. She had called Carolyn earlier and learned about the fireplace project and that Roger was out of town. Offering her support, she had baked a cake and figured she would swing by to see how things were going. The girls invited Miss Pettigrew inside and made small talk as Carolyn was finishing her shower. As Carolyn began to dress, her moment of peace was rudely interrupted. A large coat hanger abruptly lifted from the rack beside her, and again, as if held by an invisible hand, struck her repeatedly on the head and on the neck. Carolyn began to scream, and the scream radiated through the house. Everyone came rushing to her assistance, including Miss Pettigrew. When they burst into the bathroom, they all stood frozen in disbelief to what they were witnessing. Right before their eyes, the coat hanger continued its assaults. It relentlessly slammed into Carolyn's body by some unseen force. The assault only lasted moments, but it felt like a lifetime. When it was over, the hanger fell to the floor and remained, as it should have always remained, motionless. The next several moments were silent. Everyone trapped in their own thoughts of disbelief, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The silence eventually evolved into half-hearted reassurances that everything was going to be okay. Once Miss Pettigrew was convinced that Carolyn was, quote unquote, okay, whatever the fuck that means.
How is everything going to be okay? There was just a fucking hanger, like, beating this woman.
It's going to be okay. I'm going home.
It's fine. Yeah. I made you some cake.
Yep. Chris nailed it. The second she was like, yeah, everything's okay, the neighbor decided it was time for her to go. At the door, Miss Pettigrew leaned into Carolyn and whispered, the Kenyons always kept their lights on at night. All the lights. Every night. Miss Pettigrew then stepped into the darkness and never returned to the house again.
Smart.
Fuck.
Yeah. Right?
Oh my God.
Like, holy shit.
And then, like, she just says that and then just, like, leaves? She's just, like, every light, all the time, at night.
Yeah.
Peace.
Maybe she was trying to offer advice. Like, I don't know why they did this, but try, girl. Just do something. Do something.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It seemed that opening the fireplace had unlocked something else within inside the house.
I think so.
The coat hanger incident was disturbing enough, but now, several times a day, the pantry door that was directly across from the fireplace would just click open on its own. Somehow, managing to unlatch itself from the old latches that should have kept it firmly closed. That's right. It was one of those old doors with the latching system. So somehow the latch would go up and the door would swing open.
It's terrifying. Because how do you explain that?
Yeah.
How do you explain it?
Well, we're going to see how they did.
I'm looking at Chris. How would you explain that? Because I feel like I lean more towards the believer in the paranormal.
I can't explain it at this point. I mean, multiple witnesses, multiple incidences. It's, I have nothing.
Okay.
It's a ghost.
It is. It didn't matter if the house was empty or full, or if someone was in the room or not. The pantry door would creak open, loud enough to catch the attention of any spectators in the room, and it would open just enough to appear as though someone was peeking out from inside.
Mm.
When Roger returned home, Carolyn showed him the fireplace, bracing for anger. But to her surprise, he wasn't upset. Weirdly, he was inspired. He talked endlessly about replacing the hearthstone with granite and how nice the fireplace would look once they remodeled. Roger dove headfirst into this project. As the couple stood in front of the fireplace discussing how to approach the renovations, the pantry door suddenly clicked open. Roger turned his head sharply towards it. Finally, it was happening while he was home. Surely, he would finally start to believe. Carolyn explained how this was now a frequent, unexplainable occurrence. Roger looked the door over and dismissed it with a shrug, suggesting the floorboards must have shifted during the dismantling of the fireplace. But before Carolyn could argue, a stench filled the room, a foul, rancid odor like rotting flesh. As Roger made moves to escape the smell, his plan was interrupted by a sudden, sharp drop in temperature, a weird string of events, one after another. Roger stopped to contemplate what was happening. Then, as quickly as the cold and stench had arrived, they were gone. Later that day, and with the odd occurrences of the afternoon, Kaylin broached the subject of the coat hanger attack with Roger. She was desperate for Roger to understand that something was wrong with the house, but it didn't matter how many witnesses had been present or what they had seen. He was convinced there was a rational explanation and his wife was simply losing her mind. She was simply mistaken about how the events unfolded. She must have hit her head on a hanger and gotten confused. In frustration, Carolyn showed him the bruises left by the attack. Roger froze, visibly startled by the dark marks on her skin. Though visibly shaken, he insisted she see a doctor, remaining steadfast in his belief that there was a natural cause. And then, at that very moment, the couple heard the pantry door click open again. Once the fireplace rehab was complete, something happened that even shocked Roger to his core. As Carolyn stood in front of the newly restored fireplace, admiring the family's hard work, her thoughts drifted. She couldn't help but notice that for the entire day, the pantry door had stayed shut during the renovation. No creaks, no clicks, no unexplained openings. To her, she was like, well, there goes that fucking floorboard theory, you dick. But interrupting her days, Roger entered the room. And again, they immediately noticed a sharp drop in temperature. The room was suddenly freezing. Stopped in his tracks, Roger's eyes moved to Carolyn. Her expression, something between confusion and fear. Following her eyes, he saw it before he heard it. The pantry door. It wasn't just opening now, it was alive, slamming and opening shut repeatedly, faster and faster. Without hesitation, Roger threw himself at the door, forcing it shut with the full weight of his body. He wedged a piece of cardboard into the latch to keep it closed, then grabbed some string and tied it tightly around the handle, securing it with a large knot. Proud of himself, it was almost like he ignored the sheer strangeness of what had just happened. It was as if he was pretending it didn't happen, like pretending it didn't happen meant it wasn't real. The next morning, Roger woke. When he reached the pantry, his stomach dropped. The string that he had so carefully tied the night before laid on the ground in thousands of pieces, thousands of tiny fragments, shredded as if it was cut by blades. His mind was reeling. It was as if for the first time it dawned on him, maybe something was happening.
About time, Roger.
God.
And as if the pantry door torment wasn't enough, the cellar door right next to it joined the chaos. It was now open too. But unlike the pantry, the cellar door had a warped latch, one that even the kids couldn't budge open without Roger's strength. But now, the latch was just able to open on its own. What once took muscle now seemed effortless. The escalation was undeniable. It was as if opening the fireplace had opened a gateway to something dark, something unimaginable. Unable to explain, admit, rationalize, whatever the fuck was going through Roger's head, he decided he needed to do something. So he took the family to church. We're going to church, guys.
Going to church.
I don't know how to describe this. We going to church. Praise
We're going
Jesus.
to find God.
And I do want to call out that I watched a lot of videos of Andrea Perron and like her giving speeches and stuff. And she did want to make it very clear that they were a religious family. They weren't like regularly practicing, but it wasn't like they were like not going to church. They truly feel that as things start to unravel here, that the church abandoned them. They were believers and they were religious.
See, I think that would be the only place you could turn to is the church in a situation like this.
Yeah, and they did. A few days later, with Roger away again, Carolyn checked on the girls before heading to bed. It was on her way back to the room she caught a musty odor. She knew the scent. It was the smell of the basement. The basement door across from the pantry must have clicked open again. At least that's what she thought. When she went to check the door near the pantry, it was closed. This time, it was the other door to the basement that was eked open on the other side of the house. Carolyn closed it, made her way past the fireplace where the remnants of a dying fire remained. Carolyn adjusted the fire screen and headed to bed. Once in bed, she heard a loud swoosh. Carolyn jumped from the bed and ran to the doorway. There, she had a direct line of sight to the fireplace, but it was exactly as she left it. What the hell? What made that noise? Then she heard a terrible crackling noise from behind her, from inside her and Roger's bedroom. Carolyn turned around, and that's when she saw it. A fireball was ablaze on top of the dresser. The entire dresser was just engulfed in flames, crackling wildly. The room was illuminated in a reddish and orangish unholy glow, causing shadows from the flame to dance around the bedroom. The incident lasted only a minute. Then, just as quickly as the phantom fire appeared, it went out, completely vanished, leaving behind no smoke, no embers, just gone as if it had never been there to begin with. Carolyn searched for signs of evidence, but her eyes and hands moved across the dresser and her lungs filled with crisp but cool air, and no evidence of a fire was to be found. She had no idea what the fuck was going on, but the escalating events seemingly focused on her. Carolyn knew in that moment, I want out of this house. I am done with this. With Roger's closed mind and perpetual disbelief, and Carolyn's reluctance to scare the children, Carolyn sought a confidant, someone she could confide in about these unsettling events in the Harrisville house. So she turned to one of the family's closest friends, Sam Ovelson. Sam wasn't just their family lawyer, he was Roger's best friend. When Carolyn opened up to Sam and shared her experiences, she was stunned. Sam believed her. In fact, Sam not only believed in ghosts, he found Carolyn's experiences fascinating. He had his own supernatural experiences to share with her. Sam firmly believed that ghosts were real, but didn't believe they were malicious. In his view, the spirits were simply trapped or replaying fragments of their past lives, incapable of inflicting actual harm. Sam thought even if they could inflict some kind of physical force on a human being, Carolyn and the children would be safe. Roger would be the target. At the end of the day, Sam's advice to Carolyn was unsettling. She needed to learn to accept and to coexist with the spirits. After all, she was in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity on this beautiful farm. It was an amazing investment, and they could not afford to leave. Despite all her doubts, Carolyn tried to heed Sam's advice, but she also pleaded with him. As their lawyer, find a way out of this house. There had to be grounds for reversing the mortgage for not disclosing the haunting. There had to be a way out. Sam would actually investigate this possibility, but in Rhode Island at the time, there was no such escape clause that existed. That following weekend, while Roger was home, Sam decided to visit the Harrisville estate for the first time. In private, Sam opened up to Roger about his belief in ghosts. Roger, astonished. Sam was practical, grounded, well-educated, deeply respected. How could Sam believe in all this nonsense? To hear this perspective from a man that Roger trusted so much challenged his views in a way nothing else had to this point. Even his own experience with the doors and the odors and the freezing cold. Sam's belief of the paranormal worked as a bridge between Carolyn and Roger. For the first time, Roger began to entertain the possibility that maybe there were more to these strange events. Perhaps something was going on in the house. Sam's belief didn't just validate Carolyn's experiences, it was nudging Roger toward a more open mind, slowly bringing him to the table, ready to listen. After months of tension around the topic of paranormal activity in the home, Carolyn and Roger finally broke through the wall of resentment. For the first time, they started talking, really talking about the strange events happening in the house. During this conversation, Roger finally shared with Carolyn the words that Mr. Kenyon left him with on their first day in the house. You remember the "for the love of your family, leave the lights on" comment? In turn, Carolyn shared what Miss Pettigrew shared about the Kenyons always leaving their lights on at night. The puzzle pieces started to finally come together. Did Mr. Kenyon know about the haunting? Was that his warning to the family? But also, what would leaving the lights on do? How could that positively impact the situation? These events were occurring, lights on or lights off, daytime, nighttime. It didn't seem to matter what was going the fuck on with the lights. The couple talked for hours, exploring their circumstances, exploring their options, which in reality, what did they have? Option 1, sell the house. Option 2, leave the fucking lights on. Like, what options do you have here?
Burn it down.
Option 3, burn it the fuck down. Yes, Chris. The reality was, with rising inflation rates in the 1970s and home prices being impacted, combined to their already completely maxed out financial situation, selling was not an option. They couldn't move. But not only that, their electricity bill was already unexplainably high and they could barely make ends meet. How could they afford to leave the lights on 24/7? They couldn't. There was no way. They were so close to broke. Each road trip that Roger would make would barely bring home enough money to keep them going already. But just talking about the situation, the acknowledgement from Roger that something might have been happening, it erased some of the pressures that had been eroding their communication and marriage. For the first time in a while, the weight started to feel a little lighter. And with this lightness and compassion, the activities seemed to slow. In fact, the only oddity that seemed to plague them was the ever-increasing electric bill. Believe it or not, after this conversation, it said that the flies finally disappeared. Were the spirits feeding off the couple's negativity? Either way, it was like a dark veil had been lifted, and the atmosphere of the home, for the first time since moving in, was hesitantly positive. The Perron family found themselves with a fragile sense of safety, maybe even a little momentum. Hoping to continue to rebuild their relationship, Roger decided Carolyn and him needed a date night. Nervous about leaving the home in another's hands, but determined to regain some of the semblance of their relationship, they hired a babysitter to watch the girls. The plan was a simple one. Roger let Carolyn pick everything. She picked the dinner, she picked the movie, and it was even in the book that it was a movie he hated. But he wanted them to have the perfect night away, and he was willing to do whatever it took. The night ended up turning out better than either of them could have hoped for. When they returned home, no events had occurred. The home was calm. The girls were in bed. Things were peaceful. Relieved, couple decided to just go to bed. That night, see Kathy's face already. That night, Carolyn awoke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps next to her bed. Not fully awake, but sensing someone was next to her and assuming it was one of the girls, she whispered, "What's the matter?" No response. The silence now deafening, Carolyn opened her eyes, and what she sees would end up haunting her mind for the rest of her life. A woman was floating directly above her, impossibly close. The figure seemed to be emerging from the middle of the bureau beside the bed, almost as if it was fused to the bureau itself. Carolyn noticed the air was icy, and the same grotesque scent had filled the room. Carolyn was fixated on this terrifying apparition, and I'm going to read the description directly from the book. The hideous creature moved closer. So close it was floating to her that it felt like it wanted to kiss her. Carolyn kicked Roger repeatedly, scraping his shins with her toenails. One black stick of an arm flopped down across her pillow as the entity leaned over. Its head curiously cocked to one side. It was studying her. Carolyn catapulted up against the headboard, crashing the headboard against the wall behind it. There was no face, only a swirling, rancid mass of rotting flesh resembling a desiccated hornet's nest, covered in what appeared to be the mesh of blackened cobwebs, flimsy whips of whirly hair clinging to the crown. Grabbing a fistful of hair, Carolyn jerked Roger's head severely back and forth in an attempt to wake him. His body was limp. Lifeless, she was certain he was already dead, believing the intruder had killed him and was about to claim her as well. She rolled on top of Roger to get out of the way. Pulling the blanket as she fell off revealed his back. A shocking sight momentarily diverted her attention from the imposing apparition. His back and shoulders, even his ribcage, was covered with deeply abraded scratches, as if he'd been clawed to death by a wild animal. Then just like that, the apparition was gone. Roger let out a moan and then fell back into a deep sleep.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Nope. Nope.
You could imagine the fear that must have penetrated Carolyn's mind after this event. Her weeks of peace rudely interrupted by this terrifying experience. The family's reprieve almost seemed to supercharge into a much larger, terrifying, and violent event. In her panic and desperation, Carolyn didn't know what to do. So immediately after the event, she grabbed the notebook and she wrote. She documented everything, the apparition's appearance, the horrifying detail, the sensation, the smells. She wanted to preserve the event as vividly as possible. After documenting, reliving, and processing the horror, Carolyn arrived at a chilling conclusion. She believed the attack had been triggered by the date night. Deep down, Carolyn felt that the spirit wasn't just tormenting her, it was targeting her. She was the focus of the house's ferocity. No one seemed to be experiencing its full wrath. She was certain that the spirit had clawed Roger's back as punishment for taking Carolyn out on a date and had tried to kill Carolyn because, in its eyes, there could only be one mistress of the house. In her heart, she believed the spirit wanted Roger for itself. This unsettling theory wasn't entirely baseless. Over time, as the events and the encounters in the house would unfold, they would unfold in ways that would support this theory. Do you want to hear a couple of ways?
Yes.
Roger would go on to have many strange and almost intimate experiences. These moments most frequently occurred while Roger was alone in the cellar. Whatever he'd be fixing, the furnace or adjusting the water heater or tending to other tasks, without warning, a deep chill would wash over him. And just like Carolyn's experiences, it'd be accompanied by an unmistakable suffocating sense of death. But unlike the violent encounters Carolyn would face, most of Roger's experiences carried an almost unsettling feeling of sensuality to them. In the stillness of the cellar, he would feel the lightest touch, a hand resting on his shoulder, as fingers would trail slowly, almost deliberately down the length of his back. The touch lingered just long enough to send a shiver through him, but it wasn't rough or threatening. If anything, it felt tender. Oftentimes, feeling this, Roger would turn around expecting to find Carolyn coming to check in on him or to apologize after a fight. But when he would turn around to address his wife, no one was there.
It's like the ghost is like seducing him.
Yeah, kind of in ways.
He got ghost groped.
He got ghost groped. You got touched? Touched by a ghost? Oh, God. Though the sensation spooked him, Roger couldn't bring himself to label it as evil. At times, the encounters left him more puzzled than frightened. Even the night after Carolyn's experience, and even though Roger woke up the next day tender with scratches along his back and in pain, and even with his recent mental breakthrough, Roger chose denial. Even though he couldn't explain what happened to his back or what had happened to Carolyn, he chose to ignore the events and pretend they weren't real. Perhaps this was the easiest way for him to cope with the fact that he couldn't control or stop what was happening. Maybe he was simply too scared to confront the truth. Whatever the reason, the small amount of progress that he and Carolyn had made crumbled under the weight of his denial. His resistance to the paranormal created a barrier between them. For Roger, there was a rational explanation. There had to be. While Carolyn bore the brunt of the house's aggression, and Roger found himself sensually caressed by unseen hands, the rest of the family... I know, it's so ridiculous. Right? No, it's good. The rest of the family was far from spared. The children were having their own encounters, but they weren't sharing them with their parents.
I was going to ask you, so obviously the adults are having a lot of experiences. Like, what about the kids?
Each child experienced something unique. And if you were to piece together all their accounts, you'd uncover an incredibly large number of incidents that occurred during their time in the house. Toys moving on their own, unexplained noises echoing through the halls, apparitions appearing at all hours. Although the children's experiences were often less aggressive than Carolyn's, it would be fair to say they saw far more than she did. From their very first day in the house, multiple children reported seeing apparitions. One ghost, a man they nicknamed Manny, and super cute because they named him that because he was a man.
Adorable,
yeah, it's so cute, right? He became a familiar and welcoming figure to the girls. They described Manny as sweet, caring, and were never intimidated by him. Although most of the spirits the children saw or interacted with were described as nice, warm, startling but not scary, some encounters went even deeper. A few of the spirits left impressions that were oddly comforting. Some of the children claimed the presence made them feel loved. I want to quickly walk through a few of the more memorable experiences the children had during their time in the house. Cindy would claim almost every night after Carolyn would tuck them into bed, another woman would visit. The apparition would hover over the girls, lean in, and kiss them. They wouldn't feel threatened by this apparition. It was almost motherly. However, the girls could never feel the kiss. Cindy would also claim that she knew it wasn't Carolyn coming back in because the apparition would carry a scent of flowers and fruit, and Carolyn always smelled as the home's soap. However, after the apparition left, another would show up approximately around 3 a.m. every morning. Cindy would claim this woman would make their room stink of rotting meat and would make their room so cold. Cindy would claim that this was the spirit that hates their mom. It would also share that although she hated her mom, the spirits loved the girls and just wanted to be with them. She even had an experience where this same spirit, again described with the same dropping in temperature and the same deathly scent, would come to Cindy and say, "Come with me."
Ooh.
Don't go. Cindy, don't go.
Cindy didn't go.
Thank God.
Yeah, Cindy was a smart girl.
This is tying into the overall theme of wants her out of the house. She wants to be the woman of the house again.
Yeah. I also want to share one incredibly scary incident that Cindy experienced one night when she was sleeping in Andrea's room. This is written from Cindy's perspective and taken directly from Andrea Perron's book. Some intrusion disturbed her sleep. The nightlight revealed the dark presence of an opaque figure hovering directly over her sister Andrea, only inches above her. Cindy gasps, draining her breath inward. Andrea was motionless, lying on her side, a quilt up over her head. The black, vaporish apparition was free-floating, lifting up and then skirming down again, almost touching Andrea through the surface of the quilt. Contact was made. It resembled a storm cloud, an elusive form raising and then falling. It was almost like it was breathing for her or in unison with her. Cindy found it mesmerizing. It was doing something to Andrea, perhaps drawing energy from her. Startled, Cindy moved, and it was as if the black cloud saw her. It made a move in her direction. It wrapped itself around her ankles and dragged her from the very ground she was sleeping on, jerking her body so hard her head struck the floor. It pulled her as she wailed for help, begging it to stop. Andrea never moved or woke. The cloud dragged her backwards down the staircase. She grabbed the banister and it felt like the spirit was about to rip her legs off her body. She closed her eyes and begged for God to help. She was so scared that she wet herself. But the second that she asked for God's help, it seemed to stop.
Wow.
Yeah.
Terrifying, right? Another set of stories from Cindy claims when they first moved in, at night, she could hear chanting off from the distance. At first, she couldn't make out the words, but as it happened more and more as the months passed, she could hear it better and better. Then eventually, spirits started to surround her bed at night, multiple spirits, and when they would appear, she could hear their chants crystal clear. She would hear them say, "There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall." It would start with one spirit saying it at first, then multiple spirits. Then it would be like they were singing it in unison. "There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall." This would become a regular activity and occurrence for Cindy.
Are there 7 dead soldiers buried in the walls?
They never found any soldiers buried in the walls. Fun fact though, I'm going to edit this out. They have done some ground penetrating radar around like the outline of the house. There's a rock wall and they have found 7 disturbances supposedly
Ooh,
No.
in the
All
ground. For the other girls, Nancy would come to share a heart-wrenching tale about an apparition of a little girl that would come into her room and cry. Nancy would express that it would feel like the saddest cry she had ever heard, and that she didn't know how, but she could tell the little girl was lost and trying to find her mother. So I share this to say, again, sometimes these girls weren't scared by the ghost or the spirit. Sometimes, like this apparition of this little girl, they had empathy and compassion for the spirits. But not all of Nancy's encounters were positive. She also had some darker ones. One time, the girls were playing hide and seek, and Nancy went to hide behind a chimney in one of the second-floor rooms called the boarding room. Once Nancy was in the room, she wedged herself between the chimney and the wall, a perfect hiding spot. She'd never be found. Then, out of nowhere, the temperatures dropped. It got ice cold, and it smelled so terribly bad. Nancy couldn't move at all. It felt like something was squeezing against her. She couldn't breathe. Nancy felt she was locked in some type of bubble because no matter how much she yelled, no one could hear her. It felt like she was being crushed from every angle. She thought her bones were about to break. Tears were pouring down her face and she tried and she screamed as loud as she could. It was like the sound of her voice couldn't penetrate whatever bubble she was in. No one could hear her. Then Cindy, who was playing hide and seek and coming to find her, ended up tugging on the door of the boarding room. But as she tugged, she couldn't get in. Cindy said that she could feel that her sister was in the room, but she couldn't hear any screams and she didn't know why she felt that way. Then suddenly, she out of nowhere could hear the screams from inside the room, and she heard Nancy yelling, "Help, help, help." But Nancy, feeling the pressure of her chest caving in on itself, decided to again pray to God for help. And in that moment, her prayers were answered. It was as if the door had never been stuck at all and it just swung directly open and Cindy came rushing in. And just like that, Nancy was released from the hold.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah, you got some dark and positive energies in play here.
Yeah. I want to focus in on this idea of the bubble surrounding the girls because I'm not going to talk about it much, but this was something the entire family claimed occurred during the experiences. Even Carolyn. It was almost like the spirits could pick their target during a negative experience, and no matter how loud they screamed, even if someone was right next to them, they couldn't hear the screams. And to just reinforce that, think of what was happening to Carolyn in the bed when she had that spirit over her, and she was screaming, punching, shaking, doing whatever she could, but Roger just wouldn't wake up. This was just a continuous experience for everyone inside the house.
That's terrifying.
And the kids never shared any of this with their parents?
They didn't until this moment where Carolyn ultimately had this terrifying experience and was like documenting down. Andrea was actually had a dream that same night that her mother was being attacked. And Andrea came down the staircase as her mother was writing in the diary, like recording the events. And Andrea read the book. And once Andrea read the book, that's when everyone started to kind of share their experiences together.
I was also going to say, too, one of the girls' stories, she's like being dragged down the stairs. I was going to ask, like, how does she get dragged down a flight of stairs? She's screaming and no one wakes up in the entire house.
This bubble was kind of their explanation for how this is happening.
Okay.
Yeah. The eldest daughter, Andrea, and again, Andrea is the author of the book where I'm getting all this information from, would also claim to have a number of experiences. One night, Andrea was lying in her bed when she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The room grew unnaturally cold. As she opened her eyes and they adjusted to the dark, she noticed a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a tall and shadowy with a form that seemed to shift and pulsate as if it was made of living darkness. At first, Andrea thought it was her imagination playing tricks on her, but the figure began to move closer and closer to her bed. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was paralyzed, unable to move or cry. The air grew thick, and Andrea later described the feeling as if the entity was draining energy from her, like it was feeding off of her. The figure loomed over her for what felt like an eternity before it suddenly disappeared, leaving behind a foul smell. April and Christine, the other girls, all had their own experiences too. They weren't exempt. Experiences equally as terrifying. In fact, each child had dozens of written examples that are littered throughout the 3-volume series of House of Darkness, House of Lights, but I can't share them all. I just want to reiterate that I focused on some of the more terrifying encounters, but all the girls would claim that the positive interactions with the spirits far outweighed the negative ones. And they would even claim that they all didn't want all the spirits gone because they came to love some of the spirits, and they felt that it was the spirits' home just as much as it was theirs. All right. Let's get back to our main storyline. After Caroline's horrifying event with what we'll call the mistress of the house, the event where Roger's back was scratched and a seemingly demonic entity would appear over Carolyn, the girls would finally open up to Carolyn about some, but not all of their experiences. Months again would pass with limited activity. And again, the electricity bill would begin to rise. Carolyn and Roger would call out the electricity company to come check in on the meter, and they even replaced the meter, but nothing seemed to fix it or stop the rise in electricity prices. It was as if the spirits were draining the energy from the air, charging their batteries for their next chilling manifestation.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. And the next manifestation, it came. One night, while Roger was home, the couple went to bed as usual after the nightly news. But just before dawn, Carolyn awoke to a violent shaking of their bed. The bed was moving. As Carolyn regained her composure, the room became frigid. A foul, familiar aroma inched into the room. Then suddenly, she heard an extremely loud swoosh, and slicing through the darkness was light. Flames erupted around the bed, and Carolyn was surrounded by torches. Torches carried by several terrifying spirits. Petrified, Carolyn could not look away. There were so many of them. How? Carolyn claimed there were 8 to 10 spirits, each of them, as I said, holding a torch of their own. The vibrations in the bed became so violent that it felt like it was almost coming from inside of her. Carolyn tried to wake Roger, hitting him, kicking him, yelling him, but his body again limp. But then she saw his exposed back, again carved up with long, deep, animal-like scratches. As Carolyn's heart raced, the spirits took their torches, almost as if they were synchronized, and they hit the floor over and over again. The sound of the contact pierced the room. To each side of the bottom of the bed, a small child spirit stood. Then spirits, all of them in tandem, began chanting, and they said, "Beseech thee, leave. afore ye go. Beware the flame, the fiery glow. Was mistress once afore ye came, and mistress here will be again. We'll drive ye out with fiery broom, we'll drive ye mad with death and gloom. The words grew louder and louder, the vibrations rattling the glass from the windows. It was as if this all wasn't terrifying enough. From the circle of spirits emerged the same woman from last time. Carolyn immediately recognized her. The evil entity began its slow float towards Carolyn as the others continued chanting in terrifying melodic rhythm. There was no doubt in Carolyn's mind this spirit was evil. It was if the spirit could read her mind, and she knew she wanted to make a run for it, because right as Carolyn had the thought, the bedroom door slammed shut. The sounds from the torch's strikes echoed louder. The emaciated spirit again appearing with no hands or feet, and her neck snapped to one side, inched closer and closer to Carolyn. This time, her face slightly different. The entity had hollowed sockets for eyes that were filled with wells of blackness. Her body decaying, covered in cobwebs. Inside the entity's mouth, yellow, jagged teeth revealed themselves. As the entity hovered over Carolyn, it leaned in and delivered its message clearly. Was mistress once afore ye came, and mistress here will be again. Will drive you mad with death and gloom, will drive you to Satan's tomb. Thus has been spoken and thus has been read. Take leave of this place, or ye too will be dead. After the deliverance of the entity's message, Carolyn again felt as if it was going to kiss her. It terrifyingly moved closer. Then at the last second, the spirit abruptly changed its course and now hovered on top of Roger, the true recipient of the kiss revealed. Carolyn closed her eyes and she prayed to God as she saw the spirit lean in. And almost exactly as the event started, she heard another swoosh. And as quickly as it came, it was all over.
I'm leaving the house, and the mistress ghost can have you, honey.
Fair.
Can we just say that this ghost, they got the poets.
Yeah.
They got some poetry.
Yeah.
It rhymes.
Man.
I mean, that sounded a lot like a curse.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
fact she had a broken neck makes, they hung a lot of witches back in the 1500s. Makes me
Yeah.
Ooh,
think
Chris.
it might be am I too far ahead in the story?
No, you are right where you need to be, my
All right.
man. Any
Yeah.
last thoughts before we move forward?
No, I gotta get this over. This is terrifying.
Again, after this event, things seemed to cool off for a bit. The electricity bills lowered, and another calm overcame the house. But even though this event would be one of the last major triggers for a while, you can imagine that at this point, no amount of inactivity would ever leave Carolyn feeling truly safe. After all, the entity did just deliver a pretty straightforward threat.
Yeah.
Take leave of this place, or ye too will be dead. I'm not going to spend much more time diving into what Roger thought about these experiences, because by now you understand the cycle that continued to occur. An experience would happen, Roger would seem open-minded, only to end up utterly rejecting the reality of the situation, and then quickly leaving on another business trip where he would have his reprieve, and Carolyn and the girls would be stuck in the house. It's a cycle that would occur over and over and over again. After all these horrifying events, Carolyn would spend much of the next year trying to understand who the previous mistress of the house was, who exactly was targeting her. Because maybe if she could understand that, maybe she could find a way to make the events stop. The search for answers would become an obsession. Carolyn would spend every free second she had deep diving local records from libraries, historical societies, town halls, interviewing elders in the community, literally doing everything in her power to track down the history of the house. Carolyn she needed to know exactly who the person was. Carolyn's growing obsession soon tipped into unhealthy extremes. Although she eventually believed she had found the answers she was searching for, the pursuit came at such a significant cost to her family, as Carolyn began neglecting her role as a mother. Her eldest daughter, Andrea, and some of the other girls were left to fill the gaps, taking on the responsibilities that she could no longer manage due to this obsession. During her research, Carolyn would reportedly unraveling some extremely interesting tidbits of local lore. Carolyn found that the land was originally owned by the Richardson family and was known as the Richardson-Dexter Estate until it was inherited and became known as the Arnold Estate. It was claimed to have passed through the family for generations, inherited by one member after another. Carolyn learned that even Mr. Kenyon was part of the long family chain that dated back to the Richardsons. Through her research, Carolyn came to believe the Perrons were the first non-blood related individuals to ever live inside of the house. Andrea Perron's book claims her mother's research told the story of several gruesome deaths that happened on the property. Let's just quickly walk through a couple of these. Supposedly one very cold winter, 2 men traveling during a storm sought refuge under an old blacksmith shop on the property. They couldn't get in because the doors had been locked, so they decided to take refuge underneath the front porch of it. It was said there they froze to death. A previous owner of the house, Miss John Arnold, at age 93, allegedly committed suicide and hung herself in the very barn Carolyn had seen the scythe incident at. Another Arnold, a likely relative of Miss John Arnold that went by Johnny Arnold, also supposedly took his own life inside of the house. Supposedly, another death, a Harmony Arnold, died of an accidental death in the home, but there was no descriptions to what accidental death meant. One named Prudence Arnold, a young girl, had been sexually assaulted and had her throat slit by a farmhand named Bill Norton, who shortly after these events then took his own life on the farm. And another one, allegedly a father and son duo, drowned in the Nipmuc River some 10 years apart. So we can start to unpack that as Carolyn started to find her research, like, holy shit, this house, this property seemingly had a large, dark history of death inside of it. But maybe most interesting of all the stories, one in particular hooked Carolyn and quickly became the lead suspect for the evil that haunted her in the house. The person was a woman named by Bathsheba Sherman.
No.
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba.
The dog's name. That
I just got like,
I did not see that coming at all.
Yeah. A woman by the same name that Andrea had conjured up and named their dog years earlier when the family lived in Cumberland. The lore presented in House of Darkness, House of Life, House of Light around Bathsheba is quite interesting. It said Bathsheba Sherman was said to have lived and died on the property. A strikingly beautiful woman, according to legend, drew the attention, maybe even envy, of many in her community. However, the darker side of her story emerges in the Perron family's account. The lore claims that Bathsheba was accused of the murder of a child. Allegedly, she drove a sewing needle into the baby's skull, an act the townspeople believed to be a sacrificial offering in exchange for her beauty. A pact with the devil. Despite these accusations, the book claims there was insufficient evidence to convict Bathsheba of the crime, but the damage to her reputation was already irreversible. Bathsheba was branded a witch and shunned by her community, left to endure a life of isolation. But was Bathsheba truly a witch who made a pact with the devil, or simply a woman condemned by fear and jealousy? Either way, when Carolyn uncovered this dark history tied to the property, the answer became terrifyingly clear to her. In Carolyn's eyes, Bathsheba was no mere figure of the past. She was the mistress of the house, and she was the one who threatened her family. Almost a year passed while Carolyn focused on uncovering the story of Bathsheba, and during that time, there was close to 0 serious events that occurred in the house. Strange happenings still occurred, misplaced object here or there, unexplained whispers and noises, doors opening. But compared to the terrifying events of the first 2 years, it all felt oddly subdued. The spirits no longer seemed as malevolent. Instead, they acted more like lingering observers, quietly just demanding recognition, like they just wanted to be seen or heard. They didn't want to terrorize. The Perrons found themselves adapting, almost learning to coexist with these unseen inhabitants of their home. Yet in some ways, even with the peace, the damage was already really done to the family. The wedge was driven between Roger and Carolyn, and it was only continuing to deepen with time. It was like they were simply going through the motions, trying to make ends meet, tolerating each other, and trying to be there for their daughters. But even in those efforts, both of them were falling completely short. The house had claimed not just their sense of safety, but also the cohesion of their family. Even in the absence of activity, it slowly but surely was chipping away at them all. Then, unexpectedly, in the summer of 1973, a group of 6 people showed up to the farm led by Keith and Carl Johnson. The group was a paranormal investigative group from the Rhode Island College and went by the name the Parapsychological Investigations and Research Organization. I'm going to call them Perron going forward. Apparently, a family friend had tipped off Perron about the strange occurrences that were going on in the Perron residence, and they thought it proper to just show up completely unannounced and investigate the home. Because, that's how we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, New England, dude, we don't care. We just show the fuck up.
Waiter off the dock might do that at your house one day.
Yeah, we just gonna show up. We're gonna tell you a story. Sit by the fire.
We're going to investigate now.
Yeah. Luckily for the investigation team, Roger was on his way out for another work trip and wanted absolutely nothing to do with this. So he left Carolyn to decide if the crew would gain access to the house. Carolyn was quickly won over by Keith Johnson. Carolyn and the girls described him as godly. There was some kind of heavenly presence about him. He was a priest and he carried a heavenly aura about him. They claimed to be able to feel his good intentions. Carolyn granted Keith and most of the team access to the house, and it didn't take long before things got, shall I say, freaky. As the girls gave Keith a tour of their bedrooms, Keith noticed all the windows were closed. Asking why, they told him that the windows had swollen shut from the summer heat and they couldn't get them open. Keith effortlessly opened the windows and asked for a piece of chalk. He noticed that there weren't any signs of God in the room and asked why there were no crucifix in the girl's bedroom. Keith, the godly man that he was, believed a crucifix would provide protection for the children. As Nancy handed Keith a piece of chalk, he etched small crosses onto the rusty steel screens on each window of the room. As the rest of the team gathered around and found a seat on the floor. As Keith finished his last cross, the room came to life. 2 sticks of chalk flew across the room. Both newly opened windows slammed shut, sending large sounds crashing through the rooms. How they didn't shatter, no one knew. A second later, both doors in the room began slamming and opening shut repeatedly. Then, out of nowhere, something hit Nancy in the back of the head, knocking her directly to the floor. As Carolyn flew up the stairs to see what the hell was happening as there were strangers in her house, alone with her children, the first thing she saw when she got to the top of the steps was Keith's face. The paranormal investigator's face was as white as a bedsheet. Keith had seen paranormal activity before, but this was something else. He was terrified. The Perron team was not interested in hanging around to see what was going to happen next. Within minutes, they packed their shit up, they'd experienced enough, and they got the fuck out of the house.
The paranormal investigation team was like, no, we're good.
Yeah,
We're
I'm
out.
fucking out. Yeah, this is beyond me, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 6 weeks later, on October 30th, 1973, another car unexpectedly pulled into the Perron's driveway. This time, it carried a pair of world-renowned paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed was a self-taught and self-proclaimed demonologist, while Lorraine was a professed clairvoyant and light trance medium. The couple, based in Bridgeport, Connecticut, dedicated their lives to investigating strange occurrences both inside the U.S. and abroad. At the time, Ed and Lorraine Warren were widely regarded as the real deal. They were considered the foremost experts on demons, demonic possessions, and all things paranormal. Their reputation had skyrocketed in the years prior, thanks in part to national coverage of the infamous Annabelle case that happened in Hartford, Connecticut. The couple's fame had grown so rapidly that when they weren't investigating hauntings, they were touring the country delivering lectures about the paranormal. Keith Johnson, the investigator from Perron who had fled the house in fear, had escalated the situation to the Warrens, deeply concerned for the Perrons' safety. His alarm prompted the Warrens to step in, bringing their expertise to what they felt was an extremely dire situation. The Warrens deliberately chose October 30th for their first visit to the Perron home, believing the day before Halloween to be one where the veil between the living and the spirit worlds was near its thinnest. This, they hoped, would increase the likelihood of them encountering the supernatural forces that were tormenting the family. For Carolyn, who was desperate for answers and exhausted from the relentless activity, their visit offered a glimmer of hope. She remained hesitant, but open to anyone who might be able to help her reclaim the home. Roger, on the other hand, wanted no fucking part of it. He was skeptical about paranormal investigators and he was convinced that they were nothing more than frauds. He arranged to be conveniently on a business trip the night the Warrens arrived. Once again, the burden of navigating the unknown fell squarely on Carolyn's shoulders.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's a winner, right?
What a dick.
At approximately 5 p.m., Ed and Lorraine arrived at the farmhouse. From the moment she met the Warrens, Carolyn felt a sense of comfort. They carried an aura that was both calming and reassuring. And for the first time in a long while, she felt she could trust someone to help her and her family. She held nothing back, recounting every eerie detail and unsettling experience that they had endured since moving into the home. As the evening wore on, Lorraine, a clairvoyant medium, began her walk through the house. She moved slowly, methodically, her heightened sensitivity allowing her to perceive the unseen. When she entered Roger and Carolyn's bedroom, she stopped abruptly. The energy in the room was palpable to her. heavy, oppressive. Without hesitation, Lorraine stepped out, looked Carolyn in the eyes, and said, "No one should sleep in this room." Carolyn wasn't surprised based on all her experiences. And in fact, she agreed completely. The bedroom had long been a source of unease, and she and Roger were actually already in the process converting the summer kitchen into a new sleeping space for them. Lorraine approved of the plans, but further suggested that the room should be completely closed off, never to be used ever again. Carolyn next led Lorraine to the pantry room, a place that had long been a sense of unease. The door that was infamous for opening on its own. Carolyn hadn't yet explained its particular behavior to Lorraine. As they entered, Lorraine had a visibly disturbed look on her face. Allegedly, she closed the door, paused for a moment, and then said, "Terrible. Something awful happened in here. Something violent. The poor thing, so young, a girl, blood." For Carolyn, Lorraine's insights felt like a piece of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The Warrens brought explanations for phenomena she couldn't make a sense of on her own. They suggested the swarm of flies, which had plagued the family even in the dead of winter, were manifestations of an evil spirit. Again, to your point earlier, Kathy. A way to monitor and study the family to learn their habits and vulnerabilities. More unsettling was their explanation for the skyrocketing energy bills. According to Ed, the spirits were likely draining energy from the home to fuel their manifestations and attacks. With this unveiling, Carolyn recalled how the bills would in fact spike alarmingly before an event and then plummet in the months and the aftermath. For the first time, everything was starting to make sense. The Warrens, however, were deeply concerned for the family, especially for the children. They believed children were more susceptible to paranormal activity due to their openness and vulnerability, making them prime targets for paranormal forces. They urged Carolyn to let them return to interview the children to begin piecing together who or what was causing such chaos in the home. Carolyn, desperate for help, agreed, but knew convincing Roger would be another challenge. As the Warrens departed, Carolyn provided the Warrens with her notebook of research as she felt a flicker of hope. She believed they were her family's best chance of reclaiming their lives. To her, their arrival felt almost divine, as though they had been sent by God himself. The Warrens, however, insisted that for their next visit, Roger needed to be present, and they needed his permission to speak with the children. This demand set the stage for another conflict. Roger, as always, steadfast in his disbelief, angrily resisted meeting the Warrens. To him, the idea of involving their children in what was viewed as nonsense was completely out of question. But over time, he was persuaded by two things. First, while Roger refused to openly admit his belief in the paranormal, deep down, he did know something explainable was happening, and the idea that his children might be in danger weighed heavily on him. Carolyn's conviction that the Warrens could protect their family, particularly the children, was compelling enough to make him consider it, because clearly he was not able to protect them from whatever was inside the home. But what really convinced Roger was a man, obviously, right? Was Sam. More Sam. Sam knew the Warrens and spoke highly of their ability and integrity. Sam urged Roger to give them a chance, as he was convinced that their expertise could make a difference. His endorsement carried significant weight for Roger, far more than anything Carolyn or even the Warrens themselves could have said. Interestingly, the Perron girls were apprehensive about speaking to the Warrens. Their reluctance seems odd. Who wouldn't want the spirits gone? But after years of living in the farmhouse, the girls had developed a complex perspective on the spirits they shared their home with. They believed that most of the entities were not malicious, but rather kind, gentle souls who simply wanted to be acknowledged. The girls believed that some of the entities even protected them from the evil ones. What truly scared them was the potential fallout of involving the Warrens. What if the spirits, feeling threatened, became angry? What if they sought revenge? The girls were scared of the involvement disrupting the delicate balance the family had finally found. The activity had diminished significantly over the past year and had allowed the family to reclaim some sense of normalcy. They didn't want to jeopardize that fragile peace. Even Carolyn found herself agreeing with that perspective. While she wasn't particularly attached to the spirits and would gladly have banished them all, she too feared the consequences of the Warrens' involvement. The house had grown quiet, and she worried that interference might trigger something violent. But for Lorraine Warren, the presence of a clearly malevolent spirit, one that had targeted Carolyn so relentlessly, was enough to take the risk. And above everything else, they had to protect the girls. The chance to banish the darkness that loomed over the family and restore true peace was worth whatever wrath might follow. Carolyn, desperate for a resolution, decided to trust Lorraine's judgment. If there was even a chance the Warrens could bring harmony to the farmhouse, she was willing to take the gamble. During the Warrens' second and third visits, the Perron girls shared their experiences with the spirits. What stunned Ed and Lorraine most was how deeply the children seemed to care for the entities in their home. To the Warrens, this was a glaring red flag. In their line of work, emotional attachment to spirits often signaled dangerous manipulation. One moment in particular shook them to their core. Cindy, while recounting an encounter with the same malevolent figure that had terrified her mother, claimed the spirit loved her. For Ed and Lorraine, this was alarming. It suggested an evil force was weaving its way into the children's lives under the guise of affection. As the girls continued to share their stories, Carolyn listened intently. With each new experience shared, horror gripped her. Carolyn had always known her children were affected by the house's activity, but she had underestimated the extent. The girls had been keeping some of the stuff from her. One space the Warrens investigated closely was the boarding room, the same room where Nancy had that experience, that sensation of being squeezed to death. Lorraine, upon entering the room, felt an immediate and overwhelming spiritual negativity. She forbade the children from ever playing in that room again, a lesson they had already learned the hard way and had never played in the room since Nancy's events. Toward the end of the third visit, Lorraine pulled Carolyn aside. She revealed what she and Ed had concluded. The house was teeming with spirits. While many of them benign or even protective, there was one spirit of unmistakable evil. Its name, they believed, Bathsheba. Now, supposedly they brought this name up, but I do want to piece in that they had all of Carolyn's notes.
Yes.
That must have been
it's written
down as Bathsheba. So yeah. I'm pretty sure this is how this is all kind of connecting together. After Lorraine named the spirit, there was a sudden shift in Carolyn. Her demeanor changed suddenly and drastically. Carolyn grew distant, her gaze unfocused, and her voice dropped to an unfamiliar tone. She avoided eye contact with the Warrens and seemed distracted, as though in a trance. When she finally spoke, she tried to dismiss herself, claiming the children were hungry and she needed to prepare dinner. Ed and Lorraine exchanged uneasy glances. Something was off. Lorraine, sensing the change, gently touched Carolyn's hand and said her name. In an instant, Carolyn seemed to snap back to herself. Her eyes refocused, her tone brightened, and she even smiled, inviting the Warrens to now stay for dinner. The eerie transformation was as troubling as it was puzzling to the Warrens. To them, this was a sign that Carolyn may have been in the first stages of some type of possession. They believed a possession occurred in 3 stages: infestation, oppression, and possession. Just to kind of talk a little more about that, let's give what the Warrens thought a definition was for each of these. During infestation, a demonic entity manifests and shows subtle signs: unexplained noises, foul odors, shadows, physical disturbances like objects moving on their own. During oppression, the entity shifts its focus to a specific individual. It intensifies its attacks by instilling hopelessness, fear, and mental turmoil. People experience sleep deprivation, depression, physical attacks like bruises and scratches appearing, all with the goal to wear down the victim's resistance and make them vulnerable for ultimately a possession. During a possession, the entity gains control over the victim. Their voice, body can be used by the demon, often manifesting in violent outbursts, uncharacteristic behavior, or speaking unknown languages. The free will of the victim is suppressed, and an exorcism is typically required to remove a possession. So those are the stages that Ed and Warren are thinking about as they're watching this weird moment happen with Carolyn directly in front of them.
Yeah, those stages sound very familiar to the story so far.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Like, it sounds like she's already gone through some of those.
Absolutely. Fearing that Carolyn was already in the oppression stage and potentially on the edge of a full-blown possession, they knew their work was far from over. Before leaving, Carolyn invited them to return whenever they needed, no calls or notice required. For Ed and Lorraine, the battle ahead was becoming very clear. Within weeks, Lorraine called Carolyn with a proposal, a seance. She explained that it could reveal the spirit tormenting the family, who they already believed to be Bathsheba, and free the Perron family from the demon's grasp. With a medium and a priest present, Lorraine assured Carolyn this was the next logical step, but Carolyn hesitated. She knew there was no way Roger would ever approve of this, and her own doubts were even starting to linger. After speaking with her friend Fran, who had endured a seance gone terribly wrong, her reservations grew. Fran warned that seances could open dangerous portals, unleashing chaos beyond imagination. Carolyn took her advice to heart. Fran said, and I quote, If it were my choice, there's no way I would allow a seance inside of my home.
How much worse could it get?
Come on now. Yeah, things are getting pretty fucking spooky, right?
I mean, you literally have like spirits hovering over you. Like,
Carolyn reflected on the slowing activity in the house. Could the seance stir things up again? Carolyn began to have doubts about the Warrens, and she began to start thinking about that maybe the best route was just what they had been doing, accepting the spirits. There hadn't been activity, and maybe this was their best option. Carolyn ultimately decided to end contact with the Warrens. But before she could officially do that, she realized she needed one last final meeting in order to retrieve her notebook of research that she gave to the Warrens back. She wanted this as a record of the family's experiences. It was deeply personal, so her plan, one last interaction with the Warrens, and she would close this chapter of the story for good. After not hearing back from Carolyn, the Warrens began to feel a sense of urgency. Feeling the need to persuade Roger to go along with the seance, the Warrens decided to call Carolyn, asking if they could visit and speak to Roger directly. They wanted to present their case, prove to him that it was the next logical step. Although Carolyn had already decided against the seance shit, she reluctantly agreed. Carolyn's plan was an easy one: have a convo, get her book back, and then peace out. But what unfolded that night was nothing short of terrifying. When the Warrens arrived, it wasn't just the two of them. 3 vehicles pulled into the driveway, carrying not only Ed and Lorraine, but also a medium named Mary, a priest, and an entire recording crew. What was supposed to be a simple conversation turned into a complete circus. Furious, Roger demanded answers. He had never been comfortable with the Warrens' involvement and didn't even want them there that night. Now this, he couldn't believe Carolyn had allowed it, but even Carolyn was blindsided. Lorraine took charge. Fully aware that they were overstepping boundaries, she acknowledged Roger's anger, but emphasized their deep concern for the family, especially the children. She explained that a demon was tormenting them and that a seance was the only way to stop it. Lorraine begged Roger to at least meet the medium, meet the priest. If after speaking to all of them, he refused, they would up and leave. But once inside, once the team began setting up their equipment, audio recorders, cameras, sensors, the seance table, there was no turning back. Everyone knew it. Carolyn, overwhelmed and unprepared, shut down entirely. This wasn't what she wanted. But the Warrens, as experts, were adamant. Lorraine insisted it needed to happen. This wasn't just about the haunting. It was about Carolyn and Carolyn's life. The Warrens believed the demon wasn't only tormenting the family, it was targeting Carolyn for possession. In their eyes, she was on the brink of losing her life. Her physical and emotional state, withering before everyone's eyes, combined with what Roger had watched happen to his wife over the past several years, made it hard to argue against. He literally saw his wife wither down into the beautiful, wonderful, outgoing woman she used to be. And as the moments ticked closer to the seance, Carolyn's deteriorating condition seemed to only confirm the Warrens' fears. Carolyn became despondent, slipping into a trance. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to wipe them away. Her body began shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering, and her frame shivering as if the life was draining from inside her. Ed and Lorraine had to lift her from the couch in order to bring her over to the seance table because she was that weak. Whatever was happening, it was beyond explanation, and it was happening fast. Seeing the transformation in Carolyn, Roger's resolve cracked. He reluctantly agreed to allow the seance to continue, convinced it might be the only way to save her. However, he refused to participate, unwilling to fully support what he still believed was nonsense. But the Warrens insisted his presence, his love, his energy, it was needed at the table if they wanted this to completely work. Unenthusiastically, Roger sat down, knowing there was no turning back. And what followed would be one of the most horrifying events the Perron family would ever have. As the seance began, the medium Mary, the Warrens, the priest, Carolyn, and Roger sat around the table holding hands. Mary barely uttered her opening words before the entire table began to shake violently, startling everyone. Those sitting at the table exchanged uneasy glances. Carolyn's head jerked sharply, snapping up, then down, and to the side in uncontrollable motions. As Mary continued speaking and asking the spirits questions, Carolyn's violence escalated. She began mumbling in a guttural, incoherent language no one at the table recognized. The voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, darker, and human. Carolyn's hands clenched into her fists so tight her fingernails dug into her palms until they bled. Her face twisted in pain and distress. Roger sat frozen, unable to understand what he was witnessing. As Carolyn's body convulsed, she brought her knees to her chest, and suddenly her eyes snapped open wide with terror. A deep, animalistic growl erupted from her mouth. It was such an unnatural sound no one could understand. Then, a black orb, described as darker than a moonless night, burst from Carolyn's chest and hovered just outside of her body. The room seemed to grow heavier as the orb lingered, pulsing with a malevolent energy. Mary shut her eyes tight and bowed her head and continued leading the seance, but was seemingly too afraid to even witness what was unfolding in front of her. But everyone else sat transfixed. From the staircase, even two of the Perron daughters, unable to resist their curiosity, watched in horror. Suddenly, a series of ear-piercing screams erupted from Carolyn, sounds so loud, so unearthly, it silenced the room. These were not the cries of a human voice. There was something otherworldly, something evil. Carolyn's head then in that moment snapped back violently with a force so extreme, everyone in the room froze, certain that her neck was broken. It seemed impossible that anyone could survive such a brutal sudden motion. The lights flickered erratically as a fierce wind roared through the room, whipping into a swirling vortex around the table. Yet despite the chaos, the flames of the candles, apparently they continued burning, flickering defiantly against the winds. Roger, unable to bear it any longer, pleaded with the Warrens to stop. His wife had clearly been in danger, but Ed grabbed him, insisting the seance needed to continue. They were so close to uncovering the truth. Carolyn suddenly let out another guttural howl, this time so raw and primal it exploded through the room, reverberating through the house. Then, as if defying all logic, her chair began to lift off the ground. Slowly at first, it hovered ominously in the air. Then in an instant, it shot backwards at an incredible speed. The chair was sent crashing into the parlor with a deafening impact, splintering into pieces, sending Carolyn's body to the floor with a sickening loud thud. Mary collapsed, exhausted from the energy in the room. Roger, in a panic, rushed to his wife, desperate to help her, but Ed reached out to grab him and stop him. But Roger finally pushed past his breaking point, looked at Ed, and swung with all of his strength and punched Ed right in the face. Ed fell to the floor as blood poured from his nose. As if the house fed on Roger's fury, the chaos erupted further. Window shutters slammed open and closed. Door latches clicked repeatedly, and the very walls of the house seemed to moan and vibrate as if in pain. Amid the shouting, crying, and confusion, Roger lifted Carolyn's lifeless body to the couch. As Roger gently laid Carolyn down, a monstrous, guttural roar erupted from deep within the basement, resonating through the house like a demonic quake. The walls shook violently, the window shattered in an explosion of glass, and the wooden beams continued to groan and crack under the immense vibrations. The Warrens approached cautiously, but Roger shot them a look filled with rage. Standing over Carolyn, he yelled, "Get the fuck out of my house." At Roger's command, the house fell silent. The chaos stopped, if the house itself had obeyed. The Warrens and their team exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't hesitate. They quickly gathered their equipment and reluctantly left, afraid to provoke the house or Roger any further.
They fucking left?
They left, yeah.
Fuck that, I'd be so pissed. Are you serious? All that just happens and then they're like, oh, okay, bye.
Jesus. Minutes later, Carolyn began to stir. She was alive, but barely. Dazed and injured, she struggled to piece together what happened. Roger knelt beside her, but his fear and helplessness quickly turned to fury, his voice sharp and angry as he verbally lashed out at Carolyn. Roger blamed her for everything, for moving here, for the seance, for orchestrating it all behind his back. It was all her fault. Carolyn, emotionally and physically shattered, could barely react to his accusations. In fact, she whispered weakly, "What happened?" Her words lingered unanswered as the family sat in the suffocating aftermath of a night they would never forget.
Holy fuck.
Yeah.
Is Roger just this horrible person, or is he feeling some kind of energy too that kind of changing his behaviors as well?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. Like, who is being affected by the spirits? Is it both? I'd say through Andrea Perron's book, that, well, as I was reading them, I didn't get the sense that they thought their dad was like an evil man or like a terrible human being, but more that he couldn't come to grasp with everything that was happening. And because he couldn't control it, because he couldn't keep his family safe, that he turned to like ignorance and he turned to looking the other direction. And I think all of it just manifested into fear because it was out of his control. And because he couldn't have control, this is how he reacted.
Avoidance and violence, or
Yeah, when you're afraid and
Yep.
you're looking to control something.
You're in pain, you avoid, or you act out violently or angrily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes you feel like you're back in control.
After the seance, Roger was consumed by an overwhelming sense of shame. He couldn't shake the guilt of his outburst.
Good.
The story, yeah, this is growth. Yes, Roger, yes. The storm of rage and fear that had overtaken him, or the violent chaos that had unfolded as a result. It is said he couldn't even bring himself to face his own reflection. For weeks, he avoided mirrors altogether, unable to confront the man he had become in that dark, unguarded moment. Carolyn, meanwhile, slowly began to recover, at least physically. Her body healed over time, though stiffness and soreness lingered for weeks. The events of that night had shattered something within her. Strangely, Carolyn remembered nothing. The screams, the levitation, the black orb, none of it. She only knew what others had told her, and the weight of their accounts was more than enough to make a lasting mark on her. For a couple already strained, the seance became the point of no return. Whatever thread still held Carolyn and Roger together had been snapped, their relationship fractured beyond repair. Roger, deeply unsettled by what had happened, began treating Carolyn different. There was a distance between them, one no longer born of anger, but of fear. It was as if he was afraid of her, of what might still be lurking within her. In the months following, the farmhouse seemed more alive than ever, but in an entirely different way. The activity intensified, yet it was no longer violent or fear-inducing. The family believed the seance had affected not just them, but also the spirits that inhabited the house. The entities still made their presence known, but their demeanor had shifted. It was as if they too were shaken by the seance, perhaps even scared. The Perrons, however, were the ones who had learned the most. Roger, once a staunch skeptic, had finally come to terms with the existence of ghosts. He accepted that this was beyond his control, a humbling realization for someone who had resisted the unexplainable for so long. For Carolyn, before the seance, her life had been consumed by obsession with understanding why the spirits were there, who they were, and why they were targeting her. This fixation had eaten away at her mind and at her body. But something after the seance in her shifted. Whether it was the seance itself or her determination to rise above the darkness, she stopped fighting the spirits and began accepting them as part of her family's reality, a new kind of normal, and one the parents called paranormal. This perspective change, or perhaps the power of the seance, brought about a new energy inside the house. The tensions eased, the anger dissipated, and the vibes within the home softened. Kindness replaced fear, and the spirits coexisted peacefully with the family. Whatever once harmed or possessed Carolyn so violently that night never returned. While the spirits remained, manifesting in moving objects, disembodied voices, mysteriously opened doors, their presence no longer felt malicious. Instead, the house seemed to settle into a new harmony. The family stayed in the Harrisville house for 6 more years after the seance, finally selling the property in 1980. Yet even after leaving the house behind, the parents claimed the spirits never left them. They reported continued paranormal experiences, even suggesting that the same entities from the farmhouse occasionally still visit them to this day. For the Perrons, the haunting became part of their story, a strange and enduring bond with the paranormal. So that's the story on the Perron family and their frightening experiences inside what is now famously known as the Conjuring House. But before we close the book entirely on their tale, we still have one lingering question. Was this real or just a fabricated story meant to sell books and capture people's attention?
Captured my attention, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. It got me. I read 1,500 pages. To answer that, we need to examine the facts and take a closer look at the history of the Harrisville farmhouse. What events led up to the parents' haunting and what happened to the families who lived before and after them? Context is crucial, so let's quickly dive into the history of the property. Let's start with before the Perrons. The land where the Conjuring House, also known as the Old Arnold Estate or the Richardson Arnold House, has a long history. It was, in fact, originally owned by Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, and it was distributed to his followers in 1680, who were the Richardson family, after their banishment from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. By 1736, the house's construction was complete, and its original structure still stands today, which honestly, I think is kind of fucking insane because that means that it was built 40 years before the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
And I just think that's crazy that it's still standing
and it's still
today.
there.
Yeah, it's still there. Most of these facts were actually correct by Carolyn and Andrea. The property was passed down through inheritance between the Richardsons and the Arnolds. Lore suggests that even Mr. Kenyon was a blood relative to the original owners, a claim Andrea Perron's book supports. However, I found several articles from individuals who researched genealogical records who could not 100% substantiate this claim. The Kenyons have their own deep roots in Rhode Island. So a familial connection is possible, but genealogical records can't 100% confirm that they are actually part of that original Richardson lineage. Interestingly, I did try to find evidence and records or statements from the Kenyons, anything that might indicate one way or another if they believed the house was haunted. Again, Andrea Perron's book hints to these eerie comments like Mr. Kenyon advising them to leave their lights on, but I couldn't find a single claim from anyone, a Kenyon, saying that it was haunted before the Perrons moved in there. It's interesting.
So it sounds like the hauntings only happened when this family moved in.
Potentially. I want to be clear. Although I can't find evidence suggesting they did believe, I can't find evidence saying they didn't believe either. So there is this kind of question mark. But Kathy, I like where your head's going. I was doing the same thing. Like, okay, like if they didn't, what does that mean? But let's continue digging deeper. Yeah. When Carolyn began investigating the house's history, she allegedly uncovered tales of tragedy and death that she believed explained the hauntings. Chief among those was the story about Bathsheba Sherman, the spirit Carolyn thought was tormenting her, and the demon the Warrens also claimed was inside the house. Well, let's dive into Bathsheba Sherman's history. Bathsheba was in fact a real woman born in 1812 who died at age 73 in 1885 of sudden paralysis, which back then likely meant a stroke. So when I started thinking about that, I was like, who Carolyn saw over her supposedly had like a broken neck and their neck was tilted off to one side. I don't know. I didn't know, could a stroke do that? Like, is that possible? It didn't seem like it to me. It seemed like when I envisioned what Carolyn described, I imagined someone was hung.
That's what I was envisioning.
That's what happened.
Yeah. That's what I was envisioning at first too. But now that you mention a stroke, when somebody will lose the control of the left side of their face, they'll have the droopy eye and the droopy mouth and the loss of their arm. So
maybe it's closer than I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, the neck would be turned maybe.
Maybe. But we're going to dig some more in here and we're going to see some other things that don't line up. There is no evidence to ever suggest that Bathsheba Sherman lived in the Conjuring House. Claims of her murdering an infant with a sewing needle and being tried as a witch also lack credibility in any historical record at all. Part of the lore was that all of Bathsheba's children also died at an extremely young age. That was part inside the book. Didn't share that in the story. One of her sons, Herbert, outlived her by 18 years. The gaps between historical fact and family lore start to shed some doubt. So let's talk about Miss John Arnold. In Andrea's book, Miss John Arnold's suicide is linked to the house, and it claims that she hung herself on the same beam in the barn where Carolyn experienced the scythe attack. While her suicide in 1866 is historically accurate, it occurred in the attic of her home on Harrisville Road, 6 miles away. Not actually inside the Conjuring House. You remember the story about Prudence Arnold, the poor young girl who was sexually assaulted and then had her throat slit? Fortunately, that is also true. However, it didn't happen on the Conjuring House's property, but rather at the Anna Richardson house some 20 miles away. So what you're seeing happening here is maybe Carolyn isn't fabricating this. Maybe she's digging through records, seeing people with the same last name and thinking, hey, like these last names are tied to the Conjuring House, and then assuming it all happened inside the house. When in reality, some of these terrible things may have happened, but they just weren't on the property. They weren't inside the house. So,
but they were inside the family.
Yeah, they were inside the family. Yeah. Which is interesting, right?
Well, yeah. So if they are, so you're saying they are related, like the people, are related.
Yep,
that's
they're related, but they're not
on the property. But maybe after death, they're being kind of called back to the property because that's.
No, Kathy, you're hitting on something I'm about to say here. Now, to me, could Carolyn have heard the lore? Could these have been stories that were passed down for generations that she took as facts? And to that, I say, sure, that's super believable. I could also imagine if I thought my house was haunted and I heard people talking about these stories and this lore that they heard, I'd likely think they were true too. But in the books, Carolyn supposedly did months of research that doesn't seem to hold water once we start really trying to unpack these. Now, I'm not going to go into every situation that's fact and fiction in the house, but I just wanted to show enough that might remove the veil and potentially cast a little bit of doubt on some parts of this story. The house's long history still holds a lot of intrigue, in my opinion. It stood for nearly 300 years. The house witnessed King Philip's War, which, Chris, you talked about in your Bridgewater Triangle story. It was there through the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. Who knows what occurred in that 200 acres long before the Perron family even came to exist there. There's also no doubt that there were were some brutal deaths that we just outlined inside the Arnold and Richardson family history. Deaths that were tragic, but did not occur in the Conjuring House. To your point, Kathy, maybe these spirits had some type of warm memories inside the home. Maybe something else was attracting and pulling them there in the afterlife. I think that's totally fair.
And they said that you said that there was a river flowing through,
There
right?
is.
So like, I mean, if you know anything about paranormal, they say that like flowing water will be like a conduit for spirits to draw them and kind of
it
get
definitely
their
could be
energy
that
going.
right
So,
through the property. Maybe it's something there. But I think we can all agree that none of us know how the afterlife works.
Not yet.
Not yet. But I can say after watching hours, and I mean fucking hours, Andrea Perron, of film of her, she truly believes what she wrote. Like, I have watched her put on hundreds of stories, and she thinks all this is true. And I do think there is something to be said for that. And I even saw, as I was doing some research, some documentation of friends and family who did verify and echo similar accounts. Do you remember Keith Johnson? He was the investigator from that Rhode Island College investigation team called Perron.
Yeah, the ones that ran out.
Yeah, that got there, had something and pieced out. I actually saw a video of him where he said, that really fucking happened. Like, I pieced the fuck out of there. Like, I wanted nothing to do with that. So I don't know. What does that mean? And that's the guy who also tipped off the Warrens about the concern inside of the Perron's house. I don't want to dive too deep into the Warrens today right now. I'm sure we're going to do future episodes that are going to touch on some of their investigations. We might even do a deep dive on them since they're based out of New England as well. But I just want to call out, there's evidence and allegations that potentially support that the Warrens may have been nothing more than extremely good storytellers at the end of the day, that all their experiences might have been fabricated. So there's a decent chance maybe all this is really good ghost story. But I don't want to just end it here. I want to dive just a teeny bit deeper. We've talked about what happened before the Perrons got there. What about what happened after they left in 1980? What about the people who lived there? Yeah. Well, the reality is, and I don't want you to hold your breath, they experienced nothing. When the Perrons sold their home in 1980, they sold it to Norma Sutcliffe, who lived in the home with her husband from 1987 to 2019. For 32 years, they lived in that home. I watched a video interaction of Norma and Andrea, remember, the writer of the book here, where they talked inside the home. Norma did claim that there were a few events inside the home that made them go, but in her words, it was nothing they truly believed was paranormal. It was all things they felt could easily be explained away. And I want to give you a couple examples that she shared. Norma said one night, a blue light appeared and shot across their bedroom right before they were going to sleep. Was it paranormal? Maybe, but Norma also said it could have easily been the reflection of headlights from a car driving by. She said there were several very rational explanations that could justify how that light occurred, but she did say it was weird. Norma's husband reported that occasionally a chair that he would sit in would vibrate. But again, a little unexplainable, but he too did not think it was paranormal or haunted. In fact, they lived peacefully in that house for 32 years after the parents left, and the only thing they did say they felt was haunted or was haunting them was the people who would show up at all hours of the day and night trying to take pictures of the home, attempting to see some. And all this escalated even more drastically for them after the 2013 Conjuring film came out.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I also want to add that for 20 of Norma's 32 years in the home, she ran it as a daycare. A daycare! And again, no reports of spooky shenanigans. So
okay,
I think that kind of leads to some answers here. Norma sold the home in 2019 to Corey and Jen Heinzen, who then opened the house for investigation and tours. Then, Jacqueline Nunez purchased the home in May 2022 for $1.5 million and secured a 24-hour entertainment license to keep the home open as a haunted attraction. If you like some drama, do some research on that place right now. I'm not going to get into it here, but things are not going well. The entire staff has resigned. There's allegedly a ton of questionable decisions being made by the current owner, and it has all led up to the house being shut down in December 2024 by the state of Rhode Island. So if you like tea, there's a teapot full for you if you want to do that research and do that investigation. So what do we make of the Perrons' experience? What do we make of the Conjuring House? Is it just a collection of eerie stories crafted to captivate an audience and make money? Or is it genuinely haunted? Honestly, I'm not sure what to believe. The Perron family wholeheartedly stands by their accounts. They truly believe the events they experienced was real. Yet, when you look at the history of the house and the experience of the other families who live there, a very different picture begins to emerge. None of the other residents have reported anything even close to what the parents described. Could it all just be lore, fueled by fear and imagination? Or perhaps the parents themselves were carrying attachments that amplified the supernatural activity. Maybe they weren't just living in a haunted house. Maybe they were the haunted ones. I'll leave the decision to you. And that's my story on the Perron family and the Conjuring House.
Wow, that was a really freaky story.
Yeah.
That had some moments where I was like, hold my breath.
Yeah, it was
out.
really good. It was really well written. And
thank you.
yeah, I'm very disappointed that it is no longer open because I've never been there and I wanted to go.
Fun fact, I actually did get a chance about a year and a half ago to go to the Conjuring House. And I will say that it was pretty uneventful, if I'm being brutally honest. It definitely had a vibe. It was a little freaky, but like, you're going to a haunted house.
Yeah,
so like,
you already have that vibe.
You have the vibe. I manifested that vibe, right? But there was one moment. So when the parents were living there, all the girls lived upstairs in the bedrooms upstairs, and Carolyn and Roger lived on the first floor. There was one room, and I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe it was the room where those spirits would show up around the bed and they'd say like there's 7 dead soldiers in the walls.
Yeah.
So when I was in that room and I would walk into one of the other bedrooms from that room, there is this creepy little like area. It's almost like a little hallway that goes out near the chimney, and it like will stem back behind the chimney. And it's like this weird little closety looking space. Well, in the books, I didn't bring this up in my story, April, the smallest child, would go into that little corner and she would use it as like her play area. And supposedly spirits would show up and play with her and move the toys. And there was this like little child that supposedly lived in like the back of it who was like abandoned by his family, and they don't know how he got there and they just assumed he died. Well, when I walked into that little room, do you know that feeling we talked about in the story with that presence? And like, it only happened when I walked into that room. I would walk out, I'd feel normal. I walk in, I was like, ugh. I walk out, normal. In, ugh. So like, that was weird. So that room, that stuck with me. So I remember that.
Yeah, that's telling. But there's also not many rooms in the house where there wasn't a story about something really horrific happening.
And I mean, just to go on the other side of things, I mean, if you're a pretty tall dude, right? So like if you go into a space that's small, dark, there's angles where you can't see past a point, that does play on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And when you're like, oh, I'm in the Conjuring House. And
yeah, you're going in with an expectation of, I want to experience something.
But I do believe in that. Sometimes you walk into spaces and you're like,
you just know.
As I shared earlier, like I've experienced it. So I do believe in that.
Yeah. I am just really horrified that I don't know what they did with that 2013 Conjuring film, because I think this story is way fucking scarier than that film. And I just like, I would love to know what their thought process was and why they deviated so much from this.
Yeah.
Like even the details of the parents won't say that they think that Carolyn was possessed. They do think that night that like something was attacking her, but they will not use the term possession. But that description that I read to you, like that's terrifying, man, right? It sounds like a possession, but like all these details, and I just want to say for the audience, was really pulled from Andrea Perron's book. So if what they say is true, that's how it fucking went down. And that's terrifying.
That's super scary.
Yeah.
I know the Catholic Church has very strict criteria as to what a demonic possession is. And I don't know all those, but that sounds like a demonic possession to me. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I ain't a Catholic priest, but you possessed.
No priest, but that shit evil.
I'm just gonna go home and keep all my lights on tonight.
Just keep the lights on at night.
All right. Well, with that, gang, we hope that you enjoyed this story and this tale of the Perron family at the Conjuring House. And we just want to leave you with a few reminders. First off, visit our Instagram at Weirder After Dark, where I'll be going ahead and I'll be posting some additional context and images about this story. So feel free to visit us there. We also want to let you know that we are building some communities out there. So if you have not yet, visit our Facebook, visit our Reddit community at Weirder After Dark. You can find us there. You can talk to each other, interact with us, and we would absolutely love you if you did that. And if you are liking this shit, if you are loving this shit, then we are asking you to share this shit with every single person that you know. And if you are still listening right now, you're a real one. So what I'm going to ask you right now is go to wherever you are listening to this podcast, whether that is Apple Podcasts, whether that is Spotify, Spotify, where leave us a 5-star review, toss a comment on there. And if you don't think we're a 5-star review, leave us whatever you want, but toss a comment on there for us. And lastly, we want to remind you that we are always on the lookout for any tales of yours from New England. So if you have anything spooky, strange, unexplained going on in New England, send that shit to us, and you can send it to thegang@weirderafterdark.com, and we will share your story on an upcoming Listener Tales episode. And with that, remember, it always gets a little weirder after dark.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.